sun was shining high in the blue sky, and its rays filtered through the window of our protagonist, who was still peacefully asleep in his bed, unaware of the day that awaited him. A sweet female voice persistently called out to someone who seemed reluctant to wake up or get out of bed. This voice also indicated that today was the first day of school for the year, and it was time to start the routine. The boy, who will also be our protagonist in this story, still lay asleep in his bed, showing no signs of intending to get up. The woman who had just called him was his mother, and like any good mother does when her children don't want to get up for school, she decided to wake him up in a tender and unconventional way. Elemental magic, water bomb were the chosen words recited by this mom to achieve her goal. Suddenly, a powerful jet of water hit the boy's head, and he immediately sat up, exclaiming that he was awake. Moments later, we can see the protagonist sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for his breakfast. His mother provides it almost instantly and tells him to eat and not be late for school. The boy nods and also informs us that his mother's patience lasts only 3 seconds, as demonstrated by the bruise on his head. Once breakfast is finished, he informs his mother that he is leaving the house and heading to school. The boy's name is Zhang Gong. He is of short stature, with black hair and bright yellow eyes. He lives on the Tianwu continent, with Libo, the other continent of his world, located to the west. The protagonist also explains that Tianwu is divided into 3 different cities: the Kingdom of Dalu, which is the largest in terms of territory, occupying 70% of the continent. It is the richest and strongest in terms of resources. Fortunately for the other cities and their inhabitants, they have a king who is not interested in dominating the rest of the territories despite having an advantage in almost every aspect. Because of this, the Kingdom of Dalu is recognized as the peaceful nation. On the other hand, there is Ceuta. This country mainly defended the rights and honor of knights. Its knights were undoubtedly the most powerful compared to those of other countries. Last but not least, there was the kingdom from which our protagonist came from, the Kingdom of Axia, proudly recognized as the Kingdom of Magic. Every citizen here received education in elemental magic, which had 3 divisions: elementary, intermediate, and advanced. The 3 kingdoms mentioned earlier belonged to the human race, and this trio of lands was united by a common cause: their enemies. One of these enemies was the demons, better known as the demon race, who were very similar to humans except for one fascinating detail: their eyes were of an intense purple color. This race possessed the ability to master dark magic and had a propensity for violence, always having malicious intentions. On the other hand, there was the Beast clan, who were not born with the gift of learning magic but possessed brutal physical strength. They also had a distinguished royal army and high tolerance for magic. The story revolves around the fact that these 3 factions could enter into conflict at any time. As a result, one day, the human race decided to build a wall to protect themselves from the attacks of their enemies. Thus, they built the Tellin Fortress, the largest and most resilient structure of its kind. This fortress cost the lives of many humans, but thanks to it, peace had come to the continent. Demons and beasts could no longer enter human territory because the fortress had a magical barrier that prevented them. Peace had lasted for 200 years. Ending our protagonist's account, we are transported to the Senk Academy of Elemental Magic. A teacher from the academy stands before the students with a paper in her hand. She asks all the students to write on that paper which type of elemental magic each one would choose to learn. Everyone obeys, and the teacher starts reading the papers. She stops at Y, who has chosen light magic to learn. The teacher begins to explain to the young man that what he has just chosen is mostly used by monks and healers. Then she gives him an excellent explanation to consider, stating that light magic has become obsolete and somewhat useless in recent years. This is because 200 years ago, during the war between the East and the West, 1/3 of the human race were white mages. They were essential because the demons were spellcasters of dark magic. So, light magic was responsible for countering the enemy's attacks. Once the war was over and the fortress was built, providing the necessary security for the human race, most students opted for other types of elements since the light element, we can say, was not as trendy or useful in these times. Y takes a moment to think it over, but the decision was made. The protagonist preferred peace over any other element that could generate the opposite. So, he reaffirms his decision. His teacher warns him that he won't be able to change his mind later, and then she nods in response to his request. After finishing the school day, Y returns home eagerly to tell his parents about the choice he has made. He is curious to know how they will react to the announcement. His parents are waiting for him behind the front door, eager to know his choice. On one hand, his father, with high hopes, asks if he has chosen the wind element as he had done in the past. But on the other hand, his mother, with the same hopes as his father, would like her son to say that he has chosen water. Y remains silent, hoping not to disappoint either of them when he reveals his decision. It's time to say it. The protagonist tells them that he has chosen light magic as his primary element, and spatial magic as his secondary. His parents are astonished, and their eyes widen as they simultaneously ask why he made that choice. The tender and heartfelt explanation from the boy convinces his parents. Y explains that he didn't want to choose one of their elements and make the other feel sad. But he also didn't want to choose the fire or earth element, as it could create elemental discord in their home. This also relates to what he had told his teacher and his chosen element, light. And his choice was truly driven by his affinity for peace. His mother and father embrace him, saying that it was a very considerate choice, and they are deeply moved by it. The next day at the Academy of Elemental Magic, each student checks the class distribution board for each element. The protagonist doesn't find any available classes for him, so he wonders if by choosing the light element, and no other student choosing it, perhaps the school had left him to his own devices and wouldn't offer classes just for him. While his thoughts were working against him, his teacher appears in front of him and asks him to please follow her. They walk, and it turns out that due to very few students and teachers specializing in the light element throughout the academy, they had decided to assign a specialized teacher to him, and Professor Zhu would be in charge. After walking for a while, they reach Professor Zhu's classroom. The teacher indicates that the young man is ready to begin, and the professor gestures for him to enter. Y is paralyzed when he sees how powerful Zhu is, a tall, slender man with a serious face. He has long white hair that gives him an air of wisdom and importance. Standing firm with his hands behind his waist, he makes all the books around him float in the air, open where he needs them to, and later return to their original places. Zhu slowly approaches our protagonist. When he is close enough, he coldly observes him and asks if his name is Zhang Gong. Obviously, the young man answers yes. The professor then extends his arm and opens the palm of his hand, telling him to let him test his potential. With great force, Zhu's right hand grabs Y's shoulder, and effortlessly, the student is sent flying backward, landing seated on the floor. While the protagonist thinks to himself that this teacher possesses an extremely powerful aura, Zhu tells him that in order to learn from him, he will have to exert 10 times more effort than the rest of the students at the academy. Otherwise, he will only experience one difficult moment after another. Having demonstrated his power and character, Zhu orders the boy and the teacher to leave the place. The next day, Y must arrive early for class. That night, Y returns home, visibly worried about his future at the academy. His calm days have come to an end, and he feels saddened by it. The next day, the boy leaves home on his way to school, but something is not right, and he knows what it is. Upon arriving at the academy and walking through its halls towards Zhu's office, he hesitates whether to enter or not. Apparently, his new teacher intimidates him a little, and he is not entirely convinced if it is truly what he wants for himself. Therefore, he decides to turn around and leave the school. But he doesn't succeed. A stern voice calls his name, Zhang Gong. The protagonist turns slowly and timidly, and yes, it is what he expected but didn't want to expect. The teacher Zhu. Zhu gently tells him that he arrived late for his first class. Y nods without opposing and honestly explains that he overslept while bowing in apology. Zhu dismisses this and ironically responds that he must still be sleepy, so he orders him to go to the academy's courtyard and run 5 laps around it to fully wake up. Y says he doesn't want to do it, stuttering nervously since 5 laps around the courtyard could end his life due to his poor physical condition. But since he has no decision-making power and doesn't want to oppose that strict and eerie teacher, he starts running as ordered. The protagonist begins jogging as instructed, but little by little, he decreases the intensity with which he was doing it. And his life is so coincidental. Just at that moment, his teacher appears on the scene only to catch him slacking off. Zhu tells him that he won't tolerate laziness from him, and to encourage him to regain the initial pace, he performs a white magic spell that summons a fierce tiger 10 times larger than its usual size. He warns Y that if he doesn't want to be eaten alive by the animal, he should start running. Once Y finishes the physical training in which he literally had to run for his life, he collapses on the ground, exhausted with shortness of breath. Zhu tells him that his attitude is truly despicable and pathetic. This annoys the boy, who stands up, and although his thoughts tell him to shout at Zhu, calling him a lousy and ill-tempered teacher who only seeks to humiliate him, all that comes out of his mouth is the word "you." Zhu turns and stares at him, asking what he has to say. The student is frightened by his superior, and ends up telling him that he never imagined having such a handsome and incredible teacher, and for that reason, He will study hard to learn everything about him and make him proud. Zhu ignores the sweet words of the young man and informs him that he knows very well that he is a poor student when it comes to studying. Therefore, he also decides to incentivize him to study by handing him a giant red-colored manual and requesting him to memorize it from cover to cover to avoid feeling ashamed of himself. The protagonist's eyes widen in surprise at the teacher's request, already anticipating the suffering he will endure studying that manual. As if the bad news for him wasn't enough, Zhu sets the deadline for memorization for the next day, or else he will be forced to run again with his friend, the Light Tiger. The protagonist feels knocked out by what has transpired, and as he returns home, he thinks that he no longer feels the same eagerness as before to go to school. Once he arrives home, he passes by his mother and informs her that he has returned. His mother finds it suspicious that he has come back so early and notices his dejected state, so she asks him what happened in class today. Y replies that it has been a tough day and that his teacher has given him an impossible task. At this point, his father approaches, who had also been paying attention to the conversation, and promises to help him with his impossible task. He and his son sit on the couch, and his father begins to read the book to him, summarizing the most important parts and explaining them in his own words to make it more bearable and easy to understand. Meanwhile, his mother, observing her family from the kitchen, offers her support to both of them. But there is a specific incentive for the head of the family. If their son doesn't learn the theory of the book well, he will have to deal with her water bomb spell. In the end, one of those mothers who don't pressure their children to learn. Moments later, after the explanations given by his father, the boy responds that he now understands things much better. The next day, it's time for Y's classes at the Sync Elemental Magic Academy. Zhu waits for him as usual, standing tall with his hands on his hips. He has a serious and somewhat arrogant demeanor. The class begins by asking the student about basic knowledge of magic. In this case, the question is about what magical power depends on. The protagonist answers that it depends on the mage's level. The answer is correct, but there is no praise for the student. Instead, the teacher asks a second question. How is advanced magic used? Y responds that it is used through the use of spells. Zhu's face darkens, showing a hint of annoyance at this second answer. He comically hits the student on the head, who complains about the pain. The correct answer is that in order to use advanced magic, one must have great spiritual strength. To gain that strength and power, one must meditate daily. The student listens attentively to his superior's words but never anticipated that he would be sent to meditate for the next 3 months. This takes him by surprise, leaving him speechless. Zhu explains that starting tomorrow and for the next 90 days, he will not attend school as he has to make a long visit to the capital. As the first step of his training, he demands that his student come to school every day and spend 8 hours solely on meditation. This way, the protagonist would strengthen his spirit. When Zhu returns from the capital, he will test his student to see how strengthened his spiritual power is, and based on that, he will decide whether to teach him or not. The teacher turns around and leaves, but not without recommending that Y visit the library where he will find numerous books on meditation. There are various techniques to perfect it, and he may find some that he likes more than others. Following his teacher Zhu's recommendation, Y visits the Academy's library in search of meditation manuals. He begins reading book after book until he comes across one that truly convinces him. It states that for meditation, no specific or special posture is necessary. It is enough to feel the magical element to gather it. This motivates the boy, who smiles, thinking that he can meditate while sitting on the floor, standing, or even lying down, which is the position that attracts him the most. So he decides to give it a try. Y lies down on the floor and, after closing his eyes, begins to connect with the elements of light. He feels that in the air, the magical power is materialized as fine threads and small rays of light that move inward as if he were gathering them. Perhaps in a somewhat childish manner, but achieving the goal of connection, he addresses them, introducing himself as Zhang Gong, his first and last name, and saying that from that day on, they could play together and be friends. Now, the protagonist feels a warm sensation taking hold of him, and a thin layer of light generates an aura around him. Y expresses that he begins to feel very comfortable and also a little sleepy. Night falls in the academy, and our young protagonist is still meditating. Suddenly, a feminine voice interrupts the process. It's his mother, who feels extremely worried as her son has never returned home. Y wakes up with a smile. His mother hugs him and congratulates him for his efforts at the academy that day. She takes him by the hand, and together they return home to end the day. Once in his room, Y is satisfied with the training and meditation he has done. He He decides to test the powers he obtained that afternoon because he supposes that he should be stronger than before. Y extends his arm and opens the palm of his hand, praying to his new friend, the light element, to shine in front of him and illuminate everything before his eyes. Suddenly, a small yellowish ball forms in his hand. It's the magic of the light element, which begins to respond to him. The boy smiles and feels extremely surprised, not only for achieving this but also for the recovery of his magical level. Y lies down on his bed, bringing an end to his day, trying to fall asleep. As he closes his eyes, he reflects on the friendship he has forged with the power of the light element. He feels protected and warm when he invokes it, as if it were his mother's embrace. And so, the 3 months of our protagonist pass. He trains and meditates diligently to improve his spiritual connection with the light element, and be prepared for the return of his great teacher, Zhu. Finally, the day of Zhu's return arrives. Zhu enters the classroom and finds his student, Y, lying on the floor, practically asleep. When he hears someone approaching, Y opens his eyes and reacts with surprise to the sudden appearance of an image above him, shouting demon. The image turns out to be his teacher, who has returned to the academy. Realizing the grave mistake he has made, Y quickly jumps to his feet and rushes towards Zhu, embracing him tightly and swearing that he didn't call him a demon but was having a nightmare at that moment. He showers Zhu with praise, stating that he could never call such a benevolent and kind teacher a demon. Zhu believes his words but also asks him to please let go. Y releases his superior, but Zhu scolds him nonetheless for being asleep upon his arrival when he had been assigned to meditate. Zhu hastily decides to send his student running again for disobeying his orders. But before long, Y pleads with him to allow him to demonstrate that he has been meditating diligently in his absence. The teacher agrees to give him this chance and summons a light blue crystal. He then asks his student to please bring his hand closer to it. The crystal begins to react, attracting light elements from various directions towards it. This is the proof that the boy has achieved his goal. Zhu appears somewhat surprised by what has transpired but doesn't comment on it. Excited by his superior's surprise, Y takes the opportunity to ask if his magical powers have increased. In Zhu's mind, there is only the sensation that the boy is a prodigy of light magic. However, as a good teacher, he cannot tell him this so that the young man doesn't become overly enthusiastic or think himself superior to others. He must proceed with caution, but this doesn't change the fact that he understands the notable potential in the young boy, and that he has earned the start of true training. Zhu tells his student that while he has powers, they will be of no use if he doesn't know how to use them. With that said, it's time to begin training with the basic spells of the light element. The first spell that the teacher decides to teach the boy is the light shield. For this, he asks them both to recite certain words together in order to invoke it. By my name, elements of light, hear my call. Gather before me and halt all evil. After finishing the incantation, a round, whitish light shield appears in front of Zhu, who still has his eyes closed due to the concentration required for the spell. He then opens his eyes and, believing that his student has done it wrong, begins to tell him that he didn't recite the words correctly. However, he is in for a surprise. Y has managed to conjure a shield as well, and not only that, but it is twice the size of his teacher's. The boy innocently asks if saying the wrong words was the reason why his shield looks better. Zhu appears surprised and acknowledges that the boy's shield looks quite strong. He then decides to test it. By my name, gentle water, hear my call. Gather before me and destroy everything. After reciting these words, a stream of water, similar to Y's mother's, emerges from Zhu's hands and strikes forcefully against the student's shield. Now the teacher is even more surprised as the young boy's shield is able to easily block the attacker's water stream. Zhu doesn't give up and launches a second attack, this time invoking fire elements. He throws a fireball at his student's shield, but again, it fails to penetrate. The attack is withstood. Zhu feels surprised but doesn't want to show it in front of his student. However, he finds it extremely curious that the boy has been able to master magic in just 3 months, something that took him a year of practice. Y, feeling guilty and as if he has let his teacher down, confesses that he can no longer sustain his light shield and ends his spell. He then begs for his teacher's forgiveness. Zhu tries once again to summon his light shield, attempting to cast a better spell than before, but the results are the same. The shield remains the same size and strength as before. Now, there is no doubt in Zhu's mind that this young boy will become an excellent mage and that in the not too distant future, he will be entrusted with blessing the land of Tianwu. Zhu tells his student that after tomorrow's classes, they will continue practicing the invocation of basic spells. The practice promised by the teacher takes place. Y once again creates a light shield, the same kind he had shown to be completely effective, and uses it to defend against his teacher's basic attacks. Zhu tries casting water elemental magic using the water bomb spell, the same one the protagonist's mother used to wake him up when he was late for school. Now Zhu conjures wind elemental magic and uses magical wind to strike Y's protective light spell, but it has no effect either, and so, the next 10 days pass for these two individuals. Once the teacher feels that his student is ready to take the next step, he informs Y that his defensive magic is quite good. But now it's time to move on to spatial magic. Y's eyes light up with excitement at his teacher's words, and at the same time, he comically imagines that if Zhu ever treats him badly, spatial magic will help him escape from his teacher. Zhu takes the floor and tells his student that the first thing he will do is explain the fundamentals of spatial magic. With Y's attentive ears, Zhu begins his explanation. Spatial magic is divided into two categories, movement magic and attack magic. The distance of movement depends on each individual's level of magic, and the precision of those movements depends on each person's spiritual power. Within spatial magic, movement magic can be called teleportation. Teleportation can be divided into three types: short range, medium range, and long range teleportation. Short range teleportation is used to dodge enemy attacks and reappear in a nearby area without moving too far from the opponent. It is the most commonly used type. The other two levels of teleportation are rarely used by today's mages. Now it's time for the teacher to show off in front of his student and demonstrate the power of short range teleportation. He approaches Y face to face and suddenly disappears as if he had never been there. In the blink of an eye, the teacher is behind the protagonist, shaking the hood of his jacket to indicate that he was behind him. Zhu then reappears before the eyes of the child. This action leaves Y speechless, amazed, and more eager than ever to learn how to use spatial magic. Anxious to achieve it, he asks his teacher if he needs to say a specific word to use it, just like with the other elements. The answer he receives is that the word he needs to pronounce is move. The surprising teacher then invites him to practice the spell. Y doesn't waste a moment and utters the word his teacher instructed him to say. Suddenly, the boy dematerializes and successfully teleports. In the distance, there is the sound of a water explosion, like when something heavy falls into a container with liquid. As it turns out, the protagonist has teleported exactly above a nearby fountain near his training area. Zhu easily finds him and, as he approaches, tells him that he will need to practice short-range teleportation a lot because, like all spatial magic, it is very difficult to master. The protagonist gets to work and starts working hard on teleportation from that moment on. Y starts moving in very short distances until he can master the precision. After this, he dares to perform longer movements, around 20 to 30 meters. However, this takes more time and effort, delaying his progress for a few months. Later on, once he has mastered the first distance, he dares to attempt teleportations of up to 50 meters and succeeds in mastering them as well. That was the protagonist's life for the following year, until one ordinary day, he attends the Magic Academy for training, but he is intercepted by Zhu before they start. His teacher tells him that he has practiced enough during the past year and that his movements are precise enough to move on to the next level of difficulty. He asks Y to accompany him to the new training ground. Upon arriving there, in front of the protagonist's eyes, there are dozens of tall wooden poles, each with a bag attached containing a heavy material inside. These bags move from side to side, colliding with each other and hitting the other poles. Zhu tells him that the objective in this training ground is the following, but he doesn't use words to explain it. Instead, he demonstrates it by completing the circuit himself. The teacher climbs the first pole and then starts teleporting from one to another, passing through each of them without being hit by the heavy bags that are violently swinging. Once he finishes, he returns to the starting point alongside the child. Now he indicates that it's the apprentice's turn to perform the same action. Y feels a lot of fear about this new training as he knows that his teacher is magnificent, but he is sure he won't be able to imitate him. Zhu, who is behind him, ironically asks why he hasn't started the training yet, suggesting that maybe the protagonist prefers to go play with his friend, the White Tiger of Light. Y gets scared and starts. The boy stands in front of the poles and analyzes which one to start with. Once he believes he has found the correct route, he begins his first teleportation. Unfortunately, on his first step, he is hit directly in the face by a bag, pushing him backward and injuring him. He doesn't give up and once again assesses the training ground, thinking he has chosen the best route, so he goes for his second attempt. He reaches the first pole again and, while considering creating a light shield to protect himself from possible hits, a bag hits him from behind, followed by others hitting his limbs. This causes the protagonist to leave the field and return to his mentor. Y apologizes to his teacher and requests permission to go back home as he believes he won't be able to complete this phase of the training. Zhu firmly rejects his request and tells his student that he won't be allowed to leave the training ground until dusk and, in the meantime, he must keep trying. The decision annoys the young protagonist, who internally fantasizes about a lightning bolt striking his teacher. Suddenly, the scene darkens, and a lightning bolt appears from the sky, heading towards Zhu. He senses it but wisely only turns and glances at the student, who transitions from anger to surprise. As this happens, the lightning bolt dissipates before hitting Zhu. Several more months pass, and Y has become almost a master of the bag array. He manages to complete the circuit without suffering any damage or grazes. He understands very well that despite his teacher appearing to be an evil demon, he has learned a lot from him. Y has made so much progress that he is not only able to teleport rapidly throughout the entire bag array, but also to protect himself from medium-level lightning attacks launched by his teacher from a distance while still avoiding the bags. Y is only 9 years old and has perfected teleportation, although his teacher resists acknowledging it and accuses him of not paying attention to details despite his maturity. Now the protagonist knows all kinds of light spells, from defensive shields and prismatic barriers to light attacks like arrows and blades. He also knows how to protect himself from dark magic and poisonous gases, something extremely valuable to him. On the other hand, his short-range teleportation is so advanced that his own teacher can't keep up with him. Lastly, he has also learned to regenerate his light magic and mana to always have the necessary energy to continue casting spells. Now we see Y heading home during twilight, but something stops him abruptly on the way. A fierce roar is heard, and in front of him appears a menacing giant fire lion. The protagonist doesn't hesitate for a second about what he should do in this situation and runs away screaming for help. The child couldn't understand how a demonic beast could be so close to the village. Was that even possible? Y insists on getting help, but apparently no one hears him. It is at this moment that a memory of his teacher Zhu appears in his mind. His mentor had told him that the best way to test himself as a mage was to face challenges instead of running away from them. This makes the child react, and he abruptly stops his escape, bravely turning towards the beast. Now it's time to confront the fire lion, putting into practice everything he had learned. At first, the lion breathes fire, and the protagonist counters with his light blaze, hitting it but not causing as much damage as he expected. The lion attacks again, spewing powerful flames from its mouth, but the child knows how to defend himself well and uses the prismatic shield of light to avoid any harm, then counterattacks with confidence in this. He teleports a few meters away from it, planning to launch a surprise attack, but it doesn't happen. It seems that the protagonist's magical power has run out before that of his enemy, a tree several meters away, and looks at the lion, knowing that it won't be long before it finishes him off. Suddenly, a shadow descending from the sky conjures a hailstorm, seemingly eliminating the wild beast. Y is on the verge of losing consciousness but manages to see several human figures approaching to rescue him. One of them is his mother, who carries him and takes him home to tend to his wounds. The child wakes up the next day lying in his bed without any pain and with a smile from ear to ear. Apparently, the defeat has done him good as it serves as a valuable experience. He also expresses gratitude that his life has been saved thanks to the teachings of his master, Zhu, and swears to himself that he will fully obey him from that day onward. That same morning, his friend Ao comes to his house insisting that they train together. Y didn't seem too thrilled about it since he knew that his magic was far superior, but he still agrees to engage in a hand-to-hand duel. Ao launches his first water elemental attack, which is effortlessly dodged by the protagonist, who counters with his light attack, automatically knocking out his friend. Now Ao asks him where he learned to be so fast in evading, so it's the protagonist's turn to show the training matrix to his friend. Once they arrive at school, Y shows the training circuit he has been using over the past few years with Professor Zhu, and invites Ao to give it a try. Y temporarily takes on the role of a demonic teacher as he watches his friend get repeatedly hit by the violent training bags. After a month of practicing in the bag matrix, his friend is now able to stay in it for an hour without being hit. He says he has improved a lot. Y nods, knowing that Ao only avoids the hits from the bags due to his physical movement. Y doesn't forget that his friend doesn't possess the teleportation ability. Now the kids discuss the upcoming final exams in the current year. Y says that if they are about defense and evasion, he won't have any problem getting excellent grades and being able to study at a high-grade academy, although he fears that they might be attack exams because he is convinced that he will mess up and possibly fail, being sent to a Class D academy. At that moment, the teacher appears behind them and brings news for the protagonist. Hao greets Zhu politely and very nervously, then hurriedly leaves the scene before the teacher has a chance to give him a class that would leave him exhausted or simply make him play with his friend, the White Light Tiger. Zhu informs Y that he has been in the capital city to enroll him in the entrance exams for the Royal Intermediate Magic Academy. The protagonist's eyes widen automatically as his superior's comment takes him by surprise. Anxiety takes hold of him, and he asks for permission to go home and tell his parents about what has happened. Zhu tells him not to bother going alone since he will accompany him and personally discuss the matter with his parents. Later, we can see the child trying to eavesdrop or listen behind the door where his teacher is having an extensive conversation with his parents. Zhu informs Y's parents that he has enrolled their son in the Royal Intermediate Magic Academy. But his mother reacts with a sad gesture and tells him that they don't have the money to pay the tuition for that place since it is very expensive, and they are just commoners. On the other hand, the father says he is willing to give up everything for his son and will do everything possible to pay the tuition, although deep down they are just words of love for his family. He knows very well that he has no way to come up with the corresponding sum of money. With all the respect that Y's parents deserve, Zhu tells them not to worry about the tuition because he will take care of paying it in full. The reasons are mainly that the child has advanced and learned too quickly, so he knows that at any moment he could be surpassed by his student, and he will have nothing more to teach or improve in the young boy. He also points out that Y is the most powerful student he has trained in his entire life. The parents feel deeply grateful to the teacher, and the meeting ends. Zhu leaves Y's family's house and comes across the child, who has been just inches away from interrupting the conversation out of sheer curiosity. The teacher tells him that he doesn't need to worry anymore and that his parents have accepted the offer from the Royal Intermediate Magic Academy, so now it's up to the child to decide whether he wants to do it or not. Without a second thought, Y accepts, as he trusts in his natural talent for magic. Zhu bids farewell to his student, informing him that they will depart for the capital the next morning. Y says goodbye to his teacher and confirms that he will be waiting for him tomorrow. The night passes in the blink of an eye, and the day of our protagonist's departure has arrived, marking the beginning of what could be his great life. His parents embrace him and cry with excitement in their hearts. They both ask him to please obey his mentor and perform well in the entrance exam for that highly reputable academy. They wish him luck and ask him to bring prestige and honor to their family. Hao is also with them, greeting him eagerly, looking forward to his return so they can continue learning and practicing together. Zhu and Y are already on their way to the capital, where the Royal Intermediate Magic Academy awaits them. The boy asks his teacher how far they are from their destination, and the master responds that it's about 1,000 kilometers away. The protagonist suggests using teleportation magic to advance much faster on the journey, but Zhu denies him and tells him they must walk to the destination. However, he mentions that he can teach him 2 new magic spells during the trip. Radiant Binding and Cutting Light Sword are the learning objectives for the protagonist until they reach the Royal Academy. Zhu says that if he doesn't study well, he will release the White Tiger. Y reluctantly agrees, but there is something in his expressions that captivate the attention of the master. Y easily masters the 2 spells assigned by his mentor, which is not surprising, and some time later, they arrive in the capital. The protagonist can't believe what he sees, crowds of people coming and going, towering buildings in front of him. He never imagined it would be this big. Both of them venture into the city and explore the surrounding areas to familiarize themselves with the area. The first place they visit is a gift shop where, upon entering, a man informs them that new merchandise has arrived. The teacher tells his student that if he finds something he likes, he will gladly give it to him as a gift. Y browses through the items, and what catches his eye at first is a corner where many eggs of beasts of all colors are displayed. Then he heads to another corner of the shop where he finds a medium-sized, intensely golden and shiny magical wand with a ruby-colored magical stone embedded in it. The protagonist informs his teacher that he has made his choice for the gift. Zhu goes to the cashier to pay for what the child has chosen, and it is here that we see a worried expression on the teacher's face for the first time. It turns out that the magical wand his student has chosen has a value of 50 gold coins, exactly half of his annual salary. But promises are promises, and Zhu ends up paying the requested amount. Both the student and the teacher have arrived relatively early compared to the exam schedule. Y asks why they arrived so early, and Zhu responds that they arrived in advance just to observe the place. The morning passes without anything else to add, and noon arrives. Suddenly, a voice calls out to all those who have registered for the entrance exam. The time has finally come for Y to leave his teacher behind and face his destiny. He says goodbye to him and walks solemnly and alone towards his exam. Zhu watches as Y becomes smaller and smaller as he moves away, and inside, he not only wishes him the best of luck but also feels confident that his student will be able to successfully pass the entrance exam. Y immerses himself in the crowd of people. There is a long line of young people ready to register for the exam. Near him, two mages from wealthy families belittle the protagonist of this story, saying that his attire is completely outdated and that he must be a commoner who will probably not make it past the first round. Once all the students have been registered correctly, each of them is assigned a number, and now they will start entering as the examiners call out the numbers that have been assigned to them. Y waits for a long hour until he hears the call for the number 1503, which is his. It was time to gather courage and face the decisive test. Once he stands in front of the judges, they whisper among themselves that he is a commoner, so they will examine him quickly to move on to the next boy who is truly worth their time. To start the test, they ask him to step forward and place his hand over the power crystal, the same test that his teacher Zhu had given him when he had just started training him. Y obeys, and as he approaches his hand to the crystal, it starts glowing and emitting a magical aura in all directions. The masters in front of him are astonished. It never crossed their minds that a boy from this background would have such dormant power within him, so they decide to approve him immediately. The day goes on, and the first round examiners divide the eligible and ineligible youths to advance to the next test in the afternoon. As evening falls, our protagonist will be examined once again by another panel. Now he will have to perform his best in front of 5 judges, which could work against him due to nerves. Nevertheless, Y thinks that the exam will be easy since it is about understanding magic, and that is no difficulty for him. Later, the boy with the number 1503 is called to be examined in front of the 5 judges. One of them orders him to cast his magic to evaluate him. Y conjures his light shield, invented by his teacher and specifically taught to him to showcase it in this moment. The judges are left speechless, amazed by what they see. They need an urgent explanation, and the boy will provide it without any problem. Y explains that his magical shield is his own personal invention after so much training, which is why it appears larger, unlike the common ones that are smaller. The commoner explains that his shield is based on the prism and the light shield, thus providing defense and reflection. His shield is also capable of stopping bi-directional attacks within a range of 6. The judges, who have listened to him with interest and in silence, agree that the young man is a genius, and it goes without saying that he has been approved. Now we can see the protagonist walking along a path surrounded by trees and green areas, resembling a park. In his mind, there is only the pleasure brought by remembering the astonished jury at the conjuration of his light shield. He thinks the test has been very easy. When he lifts his head, beyond the boundaries of the park he was traversing, he can see his teacher's figure leaning against the trunk of a tree behind some bars. Apparently, Zhu was still waiting on the other side. The protagonist leaves his territory to be able to speak comfortably with his teacher. Once he reaches him, with happiness reflected on his face, he informs his mentor that he has successfully passed 2 tests outstandingly. Zhu, maintaining his serious posture as he has throughout this whole story, tells him not to let pride take over and to continue behaving as he has been up until this moment, because the only thing that truly mattered was the overall score. Finally, he tells him to rest for the day ahead, in which he will encounter new challenges. Y nods solemnly, and just as it seems the young man will leave the place, Zhu adds that he has been the best student he has ever had in his entire life. This moves the protagonist, who smiles widely, showing his happiness. The next day, we find the protagonist in front of a new jury who will be responsible for evaluating him in the new exam. Y feels a little strange about what he sees. He is the only one in the room. There are no other students who need to take this stage of the evaluation. Both parties greet each other politely, and the one who speaks is a bespectacled professor. She explains that he has been summoned only for this test because what mattered to the group of people in front of him was the fact that the protagonist had managed to create his own defensive spell. Y nods, indicating that is correct. Thanks to his teacher and his practice, he had managed to conjure a larger and more resistant light shield than the original spell. The professor tells him that they are eager to test the effectiveness of his invention, and the way they plan to do it is by unleashing offensive elemental attacks over the next 30 minutes. Y shows surprise and anticipation at the same time, ready to receive the attacks from the 5 professors and prove that his shield is up to the task of passing this exam. The 5 judges stand up, leaving the evaluation table behind, and stand in front of him, determined to attack. Each of them conjures an elemental attack they specialize in, one of wind, one of light, one of fire, one of earth, and the last one of darkness. Y conjures his self-invented light shield and assumes a defensive stance, ready to receive the attacks. The attacks hit him directly, or rather, they hit the shield he had just conjured. Y remains standing in front of them, seemingly unharmed. His shield has withstood the first wave of elemental attacks, and he waits for the next ones to come soon. The bespectacled professor orders the others to stop attacking and addresses the boy, telling him that the half-hour of constant attack will not be necessary since they have seen enough to understand that his shield is truly powerful and capable. She then indicates that he has passed the test. Y, in Chibai mode, is delighted to hear that and is super happy to have achieved it. Before leaving the place, the professor mentions to the student that for some reason, she also specializes in spatial magic. Y responds that it is correct, and though it may seem a little embarrassing to admit, his teacher says his escape ability is top-notch. Now the protagonist leaves the examination room after properly greeting the examiners, his chest filled with courage, and in his mind, there is only the image of the Royal Intermediate Magic Academy, which is getting closer and closer to him. Now the boy walks around the outskirts of the academy, proud of himself and without a specific destination, as he has some free time and thinks about exploring the surroundings. After a while of walking along the paths, he notices a human figure of a boy sitting in the shade beside a tree. The boy embraces his knees with his arms and tries to hide his head between them. It seems like this person is not having a good day. Y stops and slowly approaches him, hoping to help if he can. But as he gets close enough, this orange-haired boy stands alert and conjures a fire spell in his hand, ready to strike at the protagonist. Y raises his hands, signaling that he had no intention of hurting or offending him, and immediately asks him to calm down. The red-haired boy asks who he is and what he wants while maintaining a defensive posture with his spell still active. Our protagonist reassures him not to fear, as he was just passing through but noticed him alone and seemingly sad and worried, so he decided to approach and ask if he could help in any way. He then asks why he is in such a bad mood and, without waiting for the other person to answer, he asks a second question. Did you do poorly on the test? The young boy remains silent at times, staring at him, searching for a reason to trust him. It seems like he realizes that Y has no ill intentions, so he finally lets his guard down and sits back on the grass as before. The red-haired boy tells the protagonist that he has passed the exams and all the teacher's tests, so that's not the reason for his worries. Instead, what bothers him is that he has done too well in them and has failed to follow his mentor's instructions. Y appears confused because what the boy is saying sounds like both he and his mentor should be completely happy and proud of the achievement. The boy continues his story and confesses to the protagonist that his teacher had asked him not to excel too much in his evaluation since, if he drew the attention of the other students, they would surely come to challenge him, which could work against him. Y understands and tells him that his teacher is also a bit abnormal in his way of being and expressing opinions, not to mention the training and studying. Anyway, Zhu was abnormal, but without a doubt, he had done an excellent job with his student. The protagonist now asks how good his test result has been. The other boy replies that he managed to complete it in just 6 seconds when the established record was 10 seconds. Originally, he was supposed to pass the test with a medium-high ranking, but he ruined it, or rather, he improved it, but it wasn't what was intended. Y now introduces himself with his full name and extends his hand, expecting a handshake. And while waiting for the other boy to do so, he mentions that his primary magic is light, and his secondary is spatial magic. The red-haired boy also introduces himself. His name is Michael Sider. He tells the protagonist that he specializes in fire magic and, secondly, in wind magic. Then, he shakes Y's hand, who grips it firmly and with a smile on his face, tells him that from that moment on, they will be great friends. Now we are going to the inn where our protagonist stays with Zhu. Y approaches the professor with the intention of asking a question that has been bothering him throughout the day after his conversation with his new friend that afternoon in the park. The protagonist asks his superior if in case his evaluations are excellent, and his scores are very high, Is there a possibility that the rest of the aspiring students to the academy will seek him out to challenge him to a battle? Zhu responds that what he says is completely true. The rest of the students will want to test what he's made of if they see him at the top of the leaderboard. But he also adds that it shouldn't worry him because it's necessary to battle with others in some cases to refine his techniques and combat abilities. Why comically shows his concern. If we ask him, he would probably tell us that it wasn't the answer he wanted to hear from his teacher. But now it's time to end the day and sleep to regain strength for tomorrow. As the sun rises, Zhu wakes up his apprentice telling him it's time to get moving and check the leaderboard. So, they set off together towards the place. As they approach the area where the scores of each student have been published, the crowd of people keeps growing. After a brief wait and managing to make their way to the leaderboard, Y can see that he is in second place, which is somewhat relieving for him as he won't attract as much attention as the first student on the board, whose name is Hai Long Yang. But the protagonist's mental relaxation doesn't last long because, after a short moment of finding out that his overall position is second place, a woman takes a loudspeaker and makes an unexpected announcement. Hai Long Yang has engaged in dishonest methods throughout the tests, that is, cheating, and the organization of the examiners has decided to move him down 10 positions. This means the next 9 students move up 1 position, leaving Zhang Gong Y in first place on the leaderboard. His eyes light up. Exactly what he didn't want to happen is happening now. Michael Sider, his new friend, appears behind him and after greeting him, says he will check his position on the leaderboard. Michael appears as the 18th in the Magical Power ranking, 16th in the Magical Perception ranking, and something he didn't expect, he appears as the leader in the Magical Control ranking. These positions average him out to 12th place in the overall leaderboard. Y smiles at him but seems to be thinking about something else, and indeed he is. He didn't want to be first in the general leaderboard to avoid the harassment of the other students or receiving invitations to magical duels. But at least he had the advantage that no one knew his name among all the attendees who were increasing in number. Michael Sider says he will check his friend's position, turns around, and reads the name starting from the first one. Instantly, he turns back towards the protagonist and almost shouting, begins to congratulate him in front of the eyes of all the aspiring students. Y knew that from this moment on, it would be impossible for him to go unnoticed in the halls of the place, and there were possibilities that his stay there would become unbearable. The best according to the leaderboard starts to take a panoramic view of his surroundings and notices that all the spectators' eyes are fixed on him, and to make things worse, they observe him aggressively with a mix of anger and envy. The protagonist tells his friend that he will get revenge for this, but right now the best thing he can do is to walk away from the place taking long strides. The rest of the students don't lag behind and run after the protagonist, asking for a battle to test his power. Y simply flees and screams for his teacher. In the end, it was as his friend Michael had said. He didn't have to excel in the tests for these things to happen. Y reaches the inn and hides inside, waiting for time to pass and for the others to no longer want to challenge him. Shortly after arriving at the inn's door, it opens, and our protagonist panics, thinking that someone had managed to enter his accommodation. Luckily for him, it was his teacher who was visiting. Zhu tells him that there are many people outside eager to fight him in a magical battle. The boy stands up and tells his teacher that he wants to go home. He wants to return to Sank City with his family. Zhu disapproves of what he's saying, explaining that his parents have sacrificed a lot for him to be able to study. So the boy rethinks and tells his mentor that it was just a joke and that he will try harder. Now Zhu takes a paper from his pocket where he has the rules for tomorrow's exam. He has already read them and explains them briefly to his student. Those who have ranked among the top 500 positions will be eligible for a draw to determine an opponent to fight against. The winner of that battle will be awarded 50 points, while the loser will receive 30 points. The results from the first round will be added to the results of the second round, and based on that, a grade will be obtained. The use of martial skills or spells that summon beasts is not allowed. Zhu also tells him that it would be best for him to win in the first round to earn a good bonus. However, even if he doesn't perform well and ends up losing, he will still have another 80 points, which will be enough to rank among the top 200. Time to rest as the moon is in the sky. Our protagonist goes to bed thinking that he must lose. He didn't want to continue being the first in the overall leaderboard. The next day, in the combat arena, the announcer begins the draw for the matchups. The first battle will be between the first in the overall leaderboard and the 12th, which means Y versus Michael. The protagonist is still upset with Michael and changes his mind about losing the battle to avoid being the first. He prioritizes revenge for what his opponent did the previous day. On the other hand, the red-haired boy is consumed by nerves and fear. He doesn't want to face Y in any way, but at this moment, Y is inviting him to step onto the stage to fight. Y is on the platform waiting for his opponent, who doesn't seem very determined to step up. The audience begins to murmur in disapproval, and the announcer calls out the 12th ranked student for the second and then the third time. Michael covers his face with his arms to avoid being recognized as he trembles in fear, and punishes himself for what he did the previous day to his new friend, who he believes is now surely planning to take him down. The announcer calls out the missing participant on the platform once again and states that if they don't show up within the next 30 seconds, they will automatically lose the battle. Michael sighs and raises his hand, announcing that he has arrived. He then steps onto the platform and greets the protagonist amiably, who looks displeased. The redhead understands that the protagonist is very angry with him for his attitude the previous evening and tells him that his behavior was unintentional. Y tells him that the past is done and cannot be changed, so the only way he will forgive him is if he withstands the beating that Y is about to deliver and puts up as much resistance as possible. Michael assumes an attacking position at one end of the platform and warns the protagonist to be careful. Despite fearing the pain, he will fulfill his desire to fight. For his first attack, he uses his favorite element, fire, and launches 4 fireballs toward Y, who is fully prepared to dodge them. However, just before they hit him, the fireballs change direction, surprising the protagonist. Michael explains that these are concentrated fireballs, not ordinary ones, so he can control their direction at will, and now they will hit Y. The crowd beneath the platform applauds this maneuver, and begins to wonder if the number 1 student will actually lose the fight. Y knows he can't let things end like this and decides to counterattack with a punch. He performs a teleportation-like move, leaving his rival perplexed and unable to evade. The punch lands on Michael's face, causing him to stumble backward. Michael complains and asks Y not to hit him so hard, but as a response, he is reminded that the battle has just begun, so he should expect something worse than that. The concentrated fireballs of the redhead begin to explode in the air. Everyone here has lost concentration thanks to the protagonist's punch. The audience rushes to seek shelter to avoid getting burned. Michael starts gathering magic and tells his friend that he regrets having to do what he's about to do. He invokes flaming meteors and sends them straight ahead to collide with the protagonist, who must act quickly to defend himself. Y moves backward and focuses his energy on his light magic to use one of the spells he has learned along the way, the Blades of Light. He summons them in the air and sends them to collide with the approaching meteors. Both spells collide in the middle of the platform, creating an explosion that blinds the spectators and the fighters. The 2 magistrates seem to be enjoying the fight. A man and a woman in white robes with a very serious demeanor observe the battle and shower both children with praise. These magistrates hold the highest rank among the wizards. The explosion of fire and light continues on the platform. Both energies are propelled by each of the fighters, but something is wrong with them. They feel completely exhausted. It's only a matter of time before one of them withdraws their magical power and falls to the ground. Zhu is extremely surprised as he had managed to sneak among the spectators to get a close look at his student's first battle against a powerful wizard like Michael. The redhead gives up and tells his friend that he surrenders. He immediately stops using his magical power to withstand the light attack from his opponent and falls backward. Y, who also had little reserve energy left, withdraws his light power but manages to remain standing on the platform, securing his victory in this battle. The judges officially declare the protagonist as the winner of the fight, as he no longer has much strength left to remain standing and falls backward. Before his body hits the ground, Zhu swiftly appears on the platform to assist him. He then takes him to the inn. Y opens his eyes the next day and the first thing he sees is his teacher watching over him. He asks why he is by his bedside. He doesn't remember anything that happened the previous day. Zhu summarizes everything with a letter he has in his possession and hands it to the boy. The letter reads as follows: Admission notice, first place, Zhang Gong Y. Now his teacher congratulates him as he has been accepted into the Royal Academy of Intermediate Magic. Now all that's left is for the protagonist to go and register and wait for the following week. After that, classes will begin. Zhu adds that he has already taken care of the enrollment and asks Y as a favor to study very hard to succeed. When his teacher Zhu is available, he will come to visit him. Y feels completely excited and happy about his admission, but at the same time, a little sad and nostalgic because his teacher will retire and leave him alone. That's just how things should be. Zhu tells him that he will wander through the kingdom of Ziyuda, and before he leaves, He presents him with a bag of gold coins. Y feels a lot of shame for accepting money from his teacher. Then Zhu tells him to keep it for emergency situations. Finally, he instructs his apprentice to bring the beast egg they bought at the store as soon as they had arrived. The protagonist obeys, and after a while, he appears with a white egg that barely fits in his hand. Zhu instructs him to initiate the awakening of the egg, so without wasting any more time, the boy uses the magic words to conjure it, transferring his energy to the egg. He then pricks his finger intentionally to draw some blood from the yolk. The egg starts to react, emitting an intense yellow light. Zhu begins to be surprised because this indicates that the beast that will hatch from that egg belongs to the class known as growing. Instantly, a white serpent with yellow eyes and a violet pigmentation running along the underside of its elongated body emerges from the egg, flicking its tongue. Zhu informs the protagonist that this type of beast hasn't been seen for approximately 100 years or more. He will have to take good care of it, not only from other beasts but also from people. These growing type beasts increase their power based on their partner's growth. In other words, as Y increases his power, the beast will also grow stronger. The protagonist feels completely excited and decides to name his new friend Xiao Jin. Y now dedicates himself to playing with his pet and showing it affection. Zhu tells him once again to keep the beast close and take good care of it. As a first step, he must let the beast absorb his magical power. The student obeys and places the snake near his chest, and it begins to absorb his power. Once it finishes, it curls up and falls asleep in its owner's hands. Y feels extremely tired from the absorption he just experienced from his pet and asks his teacher if it's normal for this to happen. Zhu indicates that since it's the first time the beast has absorbed magical power, it has consumed half of what was available in its owner's body. From now on, this should not happen again. Now, after teasing him on several occasions, Zhu departs, leaving the protagonist alone and warning him that he will visit at the end of the semester. Y watches his teacher leave, the person he should be extremely grateful to because without him, this stage of his life wouldn't be possible. Deep inside, he promises to give his utmost effort in his studies. The week has passed, and now head to the Royal Academy of Intermediate Magic. Upon arrival, he goes directly to the administration to introduce himself. He is received by a secretary who tells him that he has heard about him since he ranked first on the overall student leaderboard for those aspiring to a place in the academy. The secretary adds that a board of professors has decided that his studies will begin in the second year. Then, he hands him the key to his room and informs him that a uniform will be provided. Y goes to his room, room 208, and unlocks the door with the key that was just given to him. Inside, he finds no one, leading him to assume that his roommates were in class at that moment. Since he didn't have much to do on this first day, he decides to kneel on his bed and meditate, strengthening himself and passing the time until he gets to know his classmates. Later, a boy appears beside him, interrupting his meditative state. The boy also tells him that as the first-ranked student, he wanted to duel with him. Y doesn't feel like arguing or engaging in a battle with this new individual he just met, so he cleverly avoids the conversation. The plan the protagonist carries out is to say that he has no chance of winning in a duel, and acknowledge himself as inferior to him. This pleases the student who interrupted his meditation and promises to treat him like a younger brother, without harboring any grudges. The afternoon progresses, and it's time for our protagonist's first class. Before entering the classroom, he comes face to face with someone he already knows. Michael has been assigned to the same class as him, and they will be classmates. This doesn't completely please Y, but there's not much he can do about it. Once inside the classroom, the teacher introduces them to the rest of their classmates, with a special mention of Y, pointing out that he achieved the top position on the leaderboard. Upon hearing this, the other students in the class start murmuring, questioning whether he is true. Class ended with nothing significant to highlight. Michael and the protagonist meet outside the classroom, and they share the room numbers assigned to each of them. At that moment, Y's roommate appears and tells him to go back and do his homework. The red-haired boy doesn't take kindly to the attitude the person is displaying towards his friend and tells him that he has no right to talk to him like that. The guy says that Y has accepted her, so there's nothing he can do about it, but challenges him to a duel, to which the older brother considerable size. Y's roommate is frightened by just seeing this attack, which hasn't even been launched yet, and surrenders. Immediately after, he announces that his father is currently the Prime Minister, thereby implying that Michael would be targeting him. The latter's by what the other young man says and asks the protagonist. The protagonist responds that he should make the decision himself. Woki Nuoshi appears on the scene for the first time, standing between the young men who are about to start a fight. He introduces himself as the representative of the second grade magic class and a wind element mage. Y doesn't understand the term representative, so his friend Michael Sider explains that it means he is the most powerful student in the entire class. Lo now explains to them that every student in the Royal Academy is undoubtedly very powerful, but that power should not be displayed in battles within the campus. Suddenly, Michael comes up with the idea of the protagonist becoming the representative of all the new students at the academy, implying to Wo that Y is a very powerful individual. The representative of the second class immediately becomes super motivated to practice with the two new students. Y, who is not interested in that idea at all, once again feels angry at his friend Michael for opening his mouth once more. So, the protagonist says that it is impossible for newcomers to have comparable power to that of a representative, so it wouldn't be beneficial for them to train together. They then leave the place. Now, the friends have a conversation in which they observe that the rest of the students at the academy spend a lot of time practicing and studying every day, and since they don't want to fall behind, they head to the library in search of new books to deepen their knowledge. After studying for a while, the red-haired boy is the first to leave the place and tells his friend not to spend the whole night reading. In other words, to rest. Now that his friend mentions that it's nighttime, he feels that it's the perfect moment to find a secluded place and interact with his wild beast, Xiao Jin. In a small square among bushes, he apparently finds the darkness and tranquility necessary to summon her, so he does it. Xiao Jin appears, and the protagonist starts talking to her, but that's not the way to interact with a wild beast. They are spoken to with the heart and not with words. At least, that's what a shadow observing them a few meters away says. An old man introduces himself to him as a light mage. His adorable smile makes him seem harmless, so Y doesn't alarm himself and ends up following the old man's advice. He rests his forehead against his beast's forehead, closes his eyes, and begins to speak from his heart. Y asks his pet if it can hear him, and if so, he asks it to shoot a light arrow. Suddenly, the snake moves away from him and raises its head. A ball of light begins to glow from its mouth, and after a brief moment of charging, a magical shot is fired towards a plant, cutting a stem perfectly. Y is completely amazed by what his beast has accomplished and turns to thank the old light mage. The mage tells him that he is naturally talented in the use of magic since he has demonstrated communication with his beast in just seconds. He then offers the child the opportunity to learn light magic from him. Y is stunned by this possibility and doesn't know exactly how to respond. Finally, overcome by nerves and perhaps fear, he refuses the kind old man's offer. He then leaves the place, excusing himself by saying that he has classes the next day. The old man is surprised by the young man's attitude and says that destiny is ironic since he has rejected many students who have requested him to be their teacher. And now, when he wanted a student to be his apprentice, he is rejected. In room 208, we see the protagonist lying on his bed. Taking advantage of everyone already being asleep, he communicates with the spirits of light. While meditating, he notices that Xiao Jin is growing, but the protagonist's strength does not increase. This doesn't worry him as long as his pet grows strong and healthy. The next day, in the dining hall, we see Michael trying to stop the protagonist, who for some strange reason has practically eaten breakfast 3 times. Due to the protagonist's constant desperate eating, he and Michael arrive late to class. The professor of the subject awaits them at the classroom door and scolds them for being late to class, urging them to take their seats urgently. Next time, they should arrive 30 minutes early to set an example. Today's lesson is long-range magic, but before they begin, the protagonist puts his face in the sun and falls asleep. Later, he is awakened by Michael, who informs him that the class has ended. Then he tells him that the class summary was very entertaining, and there was no reason for him to fall asleep. They also chat a bit about teleportation magic, which Michael has yet to learn. They also take notice of the abundance of female students in their class, apparently all very beautiful or at least to their taste. While wandering through the territories of the academy, they see a large group of students gathered in one area. As they approach to sniff out what is happening, they both see a girl walking in. With brown hair and purple attire, she instantly captivates Michael, but she is not to Y's liking. Y tells Michael that the water student is not to his taste and leaves him alone to admire her while he retreats to the dormitory to do something more useful. But he regrets it and decides to find a secluded place to practice with his light element. He manages to find that place not far from where his friend Michael was left and begins to communicate with his other friends, the spirits of light. Just as Y establishes a connection with them, a scream interrupts him. It is the red-haired boy who seems to have trouble and runs towards him, asking for help. Michael arrives where the protagonist is, breathing heavily and visibly bruised and battered. Y asks him what happened while he heals him with his intermediate light restoration spell. Michael now tells him that he ran into the girl he liked and did something wrong. He annoyed her with many questions, and she ignored him. Then, a student approached him and threatened him with death if he didn't step aside and leave the girl alone. The protagonist scolds his friend, saying that he should have attacked without hesitation. He needs to earn respect from others by demonstrating what he is capable of. Michael says that the aggressor was really powerful, so he chose to obey and leave the place. Y tells him that he did the right thing because he won't be there to heal him if he has to face that person again. Later, Michael reunites with his friend and informs him that he has been able to find out that the person who threatened him that morning was none other than the older brother of the girl who had stolen his heart. He has also gathered information that the girl is in her 3rd year, and her brother is 2 years older than her. Both specialize in the water element. Her older brother holds significant influence in the Intermediate Magic Academy and holds the title of representative of the 4th year students. He also specializes in fire magic and is a professor at the academy, one of the 10 most powerful ones to make matters worse. Y listens attentively to everything his friend tells him, but without much interest. Once the explanation is over, he simply wishes him good luck with it and advises him to pray not to be killed. The next day, Y falls asleep in the middle of class, and a teacher wakes him up with a question that luckily is easy for him to answer. What is long-range teleportation? Stands up and responds that it is a technique based on spatial magic that can summon his wild beast. He asks Xiao Jin to come out to see how much it has grown. The white snake appears before him, and the protagonist is surprised by its size. As usual, the old light master observes the beast's growth from a few meters away whenever Y frequents this place. The old man murmurs that the beast is growing at an extremely fast and abnormal rate. This gives the old man the impression that this young man will have an exceptional future, so he wants to make him his disciple by any means necessary. It has been 3 months since the protagonist started attending the Intermediate Magic Academy. His control of magic has improved significantly, and that makes him happy. However, when it comes to his favorite element, light, he has only learned a new technique called Light Tribute. During this time, the wild beast Xiao Jin has also grown a lot. Not only in size, but also a golden horn has emerged above its eyes, giving the pet a mysterious touch. Now it could be compared to a level 4 magical beast. On the other hand, we have Michael, who has possibly put in the most effort in his training. This is because he has a greater motivation than the rest of the students to capture the attention of the girl he likes. The girl's older brother has told him that if he manages to surpass him in power, he will give him a clear path to have a conversation with his sister, and he won't object. So now the protagonist goes to Michael's room and finds him meditating. Y tells him that they should go eat together, but his friend doesn't respond. He is completely focused on training his spiritual energy as he does every day. Y tells him that the girl he likes is looking for him, and Michael immediately breaks his concentration to see where she is. Clearly, this is a trick played by the protagonist, but Michael accepts it. Since he has stopped meditating, it's time to go eat. On their way to the dining hall, Michael tells the protagonist that he has managed to find out the girl's name, which is Hai Yu, while her older brother is Hai Rai. Apparently, just by mentioning her name, Hai Yu appears walking in front of them, capturing the attention of the surrounding students. Michael asks his friend to accompany him to greet the girl, but the protagonist refuses and tells him that he is capable of doing it alone. However, since Michael is impulsive, a bit annoyed, and insistent, he manages to convince Y. While they approach her, Y comes across Hai Rai, her brother, who introduces himself kindly. The boy notices that the aura of this student is extremely strong, reminiscent of his teacher Zhu. Y shakes hands with Hai Rai and introduces himself as a new 2nd year student. But that doesn't seem to matter much to Hai Rai, who simply asks if it was him who healed his friend Michael's wounds. And that's how the 5th part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word light in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video. Accompany him to greet. Mentioning her name, Hai Yu appears walking in front of them, capturing the attention of the surrounding students. Michael asks his friend to accompany him to greet the girl, but the protagonist refuses and tells him that he is capable of doing it alone. However, since Michael is impulsive, a bit annoyed, and insistent, he manages to convince Y. While they approach her, Y comes across Hai Rai, her brother, who introduces himself kindly. The boy notices that the aura of this student is extremely strong, reminiscent of his teacher Zhu. Y shakes hands with Hai Rai and introduces himself as a new 2nd year student. But that doesn't seem to matter much to Rai, who simply asks if it was him who healed his friend Michael's wounds. Rai smiles at the protagonist and confuses him by saying that now he will see if he can heal his own wounds, meaning he was threatening him or trying to intimidate him. Meanwhile, Michael can't hide his happiness at seeing Yu again, the girl of his dreams, and the one he would fight tirelessly for to gain her attention. She sharply responds to him to get lost. Now the redhead, seemingly unashamed by Yu's cruel rejection, approaches his friend Y and asks him what he was doing talking to the older brother Rai. Rai gets annoyed with him because he called him older brother and doesn't believe he has the trust or authority to do so. He then turns to finish his conversation with the protagonist and immediately asks if he would dare to compete against him. Y shrinks back, to say the least, and begs Rai for his sincerest apologies, as he doesn't feel capable of competing against him. Michael interrupts the conversation and tries to encourage his friend to accept Rai's challenge and not be intimidated by him. Y tells him that if he's so confident, he should be the one to face him. Rai now raises his voice and informs the protagonist without hesitation that even if he doesn't accept the challenge, he will use him as a punching bag and beat him regardless of the damage to his reputation. This leaves Y with no opportunity to escape the scene and with only one path to choose, facing this older brother who would undoubtedly give him a beating he would never forget. Michael feels happy about his friend's recent decision, but the latter sarcastically promises that he will take care of him afterwards. The students of the academy quickly gather around this pair of boys who will soon face each other, and rumors spread along with them. Some are impressed as they had never seen Rai fight, while others who had witnessed his battles dare to declare him the indisputable winner of this duel. Rai remains motionless, waiting for his opponent to make the first move. Y uses spatial magic to retrieve a golden staff that he should use soon. Rai doesn't seem surprised by the protagonist's use of spatial magic, but he does give him credit for it. Now the older brother tests the boy by sending multiple fireballs, an intermediate level fire element spell. Thanks to the power of the staff, Y manages to perform the attack known as Light Arrow and teleports right behind his attacker, thus evading the fireballs that were thrown at him. Rai turns around somewhat surprised by the speed of reaction his rival had, and with a smile, he acknowledges that Y is a good student, admitting to having underestimated him. After witnessing this move, he declares that he will now battle as he should since Y is not an ordinary child, meaning he will attack with everything he's got. Y widens his eyes in surprise as Rai prepares his attack. Now the older brother summons a high-speed rotating wind current in a circular form around the protagonist. Y doesn't seem surprised at all. He already knows that spell called Vendaval, but he notices that it's much slower than his teleportation. This reassures him, and he coldly thinks that he needs to stay calm to launch his attack later. Y closes his eyes and concentrates. He notices that Rai is summoning fire spirits and applying them to the whirlwind surrounding him, which will soon create a firestorm. The protagonist insists on calmly waiting for the exact moment to deliver his final blow. Michael's voice can be heard outside the whirlwind. He warns his friend that he should be careful because he's in the midst of an advanced fire spell called Inferno Furioso. On the other hand, Yu, Rai's younger sister, shows concern for her brother's actions, as if this spell goes wrong, it could harm him. The atmosphere becomes somewhat hostile, and the voices of the students who were previously excited about the duel now feel a bit scared due to the escalating aggression of the confrontation. Some students start to retreat from the area as they feel they could get hurt. Others distance themselves but decide to curiously observe from a distance, as confrontations like this aren't seen every day. Inside the whirlwind of fire, Rai's voice is heard as he challenges the protagonist to each launch a single attack, and the strongest one would be the victor. Undoubtedly, Rai is trying to draw out the potential that Y refuses to show. The latter doesn't confirm nor deny, so the older brother unleashes his Inferno Furioso attack, a large wave of fire ready to crash into the protagonist's body. Y observes thoughtfully and studiously the magnitude of his superior's attack, and he soon realizes that he won't be able to do anything to withstand that amount of energy approaching him. So, he decides to turn to the uncle and aunt of the light spirits, hoping that with their spiritual assistance, he can endure Rai's attack. The protagonist never imagined that the power gap between him and his adversary would be so vast. But now not only did he know it, but he also understood that he wouldn't be able to withstand the attack much longer. Rai materializes a few meters away from him, wearing a confident smile, and tells Y that now he will have to endure his true strength. He then makes a motion with his arm as if pushing something with the palm of his hand while commanding the fire elements to explode and ignite everything in their path. The flames intensify and gain enough power to break through the protective light shield that the protagonist was invoking, which was guarding him against his rival's attack. As the shield shatters, Y opens his eyes in surprise, as this was not the outcome he expected. Upon noticing this, Rai tells the protagonist that he's finished. Michael, who was attentively observing from outside, lets out a concerned groan for the health of his friend and leader, as he had been calling him since the moment he defeated him in a duel. Yu also shows concern for the well-being of the young man and orders her older brother, Rai, to stop his attack immediately, as this challenge was also beyond the legal rules of the academy. Y remains motionless with closed eyes and a calm demeanor, as if he was waiting to receive the attack that would end his life. But that wouldn't happen as his rival undoes his attack, and the flames vanish instantly. Rai looks at his rival and tells him that he is completely disappointed, as he was hoping to meet someone who was truly worth it. And apparently, this wouldn't be the case. This causes the protagonist to open his eyes and give Rai a fleeting glance as he slowly starts to walk away from the scene. Y tells his opponent to wait a moment, not to leave. He hasn't given up, and it was Rai who stopped the attacks, not him. So now, the boy tells him that it is his desire to continue the fight, ignoring the comments of the people surrounding them. Y has a new strategy, and it involves summoning his magical beast Zyojin onto the battlefield, which could now be compared to a 4th level magical beast. His light serpent jumps into the combat area and follows its master's orders to attack his opponent. The light serpent opens its mouth wide as if preparing to devour something, but from within, a small energy ball begins to form. Once fully charged, it would collide with Rai's body and should render him unable to continue the fight. However, there was something our protagonist hadn't taken into account. His rival might also have a magical beast in his arsenal, and unfortunately for Y, that was the case. Rai summons his magical beast onto the battlefield, named Hong Hong. It was a gigantic fire tiger that was at least 20 times larger than Y's humble serpent. But the worst part wasn't its size but its rank. It was a level 6 magical beast. Without hesitation, Hong Hong pounces on Zyojin, aiming to disable it before its light ray finishes charging. Y becomes very concerned as he watches the massive fire tiger launch itself at his pet and orders Zyojin to cease its attack and return to where he was standing. But he reacted too late. It only took one of Hong Hong's paws to stomp on the small serpent, rendering it unable to continue the fight. Y becomes deeply worried for his pet, prompting Rai to ask his own magical beast to back off and leave his rival's magical creature alone. However, something was amiss. Hong Hong turned around to face its master but ignored his commands. It then refocused its gaze on the rival beast and, opening its jaws, spat a ball of flames to ensure that the small serpent would never rise again. Y felt disheartened. His rival's giant tiger had now disappeared, leaving only dust in its wake. As this dust scattered in the air, Rai pleaded with his opponent to forgive what had just happened, as his magical beast had disobeyed him for the first time, and he couldn't understand why. But Y remained silent, staring fixedly at the spot where his little light magical beast had been charging its attack to strike at Rai. Michael was not convinced at all by Rai's apologies, and from a distance, he shouted at him, calling him a ruthless bastard, and stating that even though he was annoying his younger sister, there was no need to stoop to such levels and take it out on the protagonist and his poor pet. Y continued to stay motionless as Rai explained to the redhead that it wasn't his fault since he had ordered his magical beast to retreat and leave Y's alone. But the tiger, Hong Hong, had disobeyed him, and he didn't even understand why. Suddenly, the protagonist starts coughing repeatedly and puts a hand on his chest. Then, he faints in front of everyone. The last thing he manages to hear is his friend's voice shouting that they need help. Y wakes up after who knows how long of lying unconscious in his bed. While he keeps his eyes closed, the figure of his magical beast Zyojin appears countless times in his mind. He has nothing else to think about but the duel that afternoon and the demise of his little light serpent. Michael's voice can be heard a few meters away from his bed, and he sounds completely relieved to see him awake. Yu, the girl of his dreams, is by his side. She came on behalf of her brother to apologize to Y for what happened during the duel with her brother's light beast. She also explains that Zyojin, the serpent, belonged to the growth type, while Hong Hong, the tiger, belonged to the attack type. In the nature of light beasts, it is dictated that attack-type beasts ruthlessly go after growth-type beasts, and this could be the reason why the fire tiger didn't obey its master when he asked it to return. Y pays no attention to the girl's explanation and doesn't exchange a word with either of them. He simply requests that they return his light beast to him. Michael seems upset by this and asks him not to blame Yu for the atrocity committed by Hong Hong. She is innocent, and the true and only culprit is her older brother, Rai. After what seemed like a maneuver to get closer to the girl by the red head, they hand the protagonist a small box that contains the lifeless body of Zyojin, the little light serpent. Tears stream down Y's face, revealing the emotions he's experiencing inside. Michael tries to comfort him, promising to help him acquire a much better light beast than the one that recently passed away. But the protagonist doesn't want to listen to him or anyone else. He wants to grieve in solitude, so he asks them to please leave the room. Both of them obey before things worsen. Now that Y is completely alone, he gathers his courage and decides to open the box. However, he immediately regrets his decision. Zyojin's small body is cold, stiff, and curled up at the bottom of the box. This completely breaks the protagonist's heart, and he bursts into tears, feeling remorse and blaming himself for what he's seeing and experiencing. All of this happened because he didn't want to end the duel when he should have. He had relied too much on his own powers, disregarding the fact that he was facing a much more advanced student. Y had been thoughtless in sending his little magical beast into battle, knowing that his rival could also have a beast that was completely superior to his. Suddenly, a noise is heard outside his room. Someone had entered his space and was heading towards his bedroom. A bit annoyed, Y tells the person who just entered that he doesn't want to talk to anyone and ironically repeats that he believed he had made it clear for everyone to leave. He adds that there's no need for anyone to be near him since he can take care of himself. Ignoring all his words, a familiar voice to him but not one he was accustomed to asks him how he would feel about the idea of saving his magical beast. Y immediately opens his eyes and looks towards the door of his room. Standing in the doorway is the elderly man with Eastern features and a gray beard who had previously offered to be his teacher. He was the same person who had hidden behind the trees and observed him spending time with his pet during the previous nights. The elderly man asks Y not to be foolish or crybaby and allows him to take a look at the box containing his magical beast, as he might be able to do something to bring it back to life. Y is visibly excited by these words and asks if that is really possible. Without waiting for an answer, he pleads for the man to do everything possible to revive Zyojin, no matter the method he uses. He is resigned, and at that moment, all he cares about is Zyojin coming back to life. The elderly man kindly tells him not to worry and asks him to let him take a look. Y expresses his gratitude and patiently waits for the elderly man to act upon Zyojin. The old man focuses and emits a glow that appears to be a healing aura. This surprises the protagonist and partly explains why the man wanted to be his teacher. The elderly man was apparently a light mage, and he saw something in Y to want to recruit him as his apprentice. The older man mutters and opens his eyes, fixing his gaze on Y. Anxiously, without waiting for the verdict, Y asks the man if he can save his light pet or not. The old man tells him both yes and no, adding that it all depends on Y himself. Desperately, Y asks what he needs to do. Before providing a concrete solution, the man says that he needs to ask Y a crucial question for the resurrection of Zyojin. The elderly man asks the protagonist if he truly loves his magical beast enough to do anything for it, even giving his own life at the cost of his own. The painful image of his serpent in the box flashes through Y's mind, so without hesitating for a second, he affirms his answer. He is willing to give his life in exchange for the resurrection of his magical beast without hesitation. The man gives him a complex explanation, but in summary, he tells Y that he must give half of his vitality to his dead beast. This way, the light serpent will practically become a part of his body, and Zyojin's spirit will awaken. Y appears somewhat confused, but there is no time for questions. He just wants to see his light beast move again. He then asks for the steps and considerations he needs to follow for the proper resurrection. Given Y's behavior, showing genuine interest and concern for his pet, the long-bearded gray-haired man begins to explain the 3 points Y must consider if he wants to resurrect his light beast. The first, and perhaps the easiest for Y to fulfill, is that he will never be able to have another pet. That is, no more light beasts for the rest of his life. The second is that since Zyojin becomes a part of his body and shares vitality, there is a high chance that if Y dies, his pet won't be able to continue living. So far, everything was clear and didn't worry the protagonist, who nodded and fully agreed. But the third point of this agreement made him open his eyes and hesitate for a few seconds. Sharing vitality with his pet not only meant that they would be symbolically united, and that if one dies, the other would also perish, but it also meant that his own life would be cut in half to give that other half to his light beast. Y thought about the moments he had shared with his light beast. He had been there throughout its growth and training. He missed it greatly and wished to have it with him as soon as possible. He wanted to share every possible moment with it until the end of its days. Because of this, he didn't hesitate for a second to respond to the elderly man that he was ready, and willing to do what he had to do for Zhang. The man smiles and expresses to the protagonist that his answer was exactly what he expected to hear from him. So, without further ado, he tells him that it is time to begin the process. During a brief period that same afternoon, the elderly man explains to the boy exactly what he had to do, and sooner rather than later, they get to work. On the floor of the room where they were, the man had drawn a six-pointed star surrounded by a circle. It magically glowed, waiting to initiate the resurrection ritual. The man instructs the protagonist to place his pet in the center of the drawing and for him to stand by its side. Now, Y spreads his arms as if he were about to receive a hug and recites the words the elderly man had taught him. He humbly asks the great god of creation for help. He states that he will form a lifelong contract with the being in front of him, that is, with his pet. The elderly man anxiously observes the procedure, and after a few seconds of Y falling silent, he wonders if the ritual they are performing will work, and that is what he hopes for. A brilliant light begins to emanate from Y's chest, and it is at this moment that Y opens his mouth for the first time after a tense moment, and asks his pet if it can hear him. Zhang also starts to glow, and its body rises in the air as if it were levitating. The protagonist now smiles as he sees his pet slowly raising its head. He feels it within him, and this is a sign that everything went well. He then murmurs that it has been successful and fades away in the place. Y wakes up later in a bed that is not his own and furrows his brow in confusion. But this feeling quickly passes as he feels something inside him and brings a hand to his chest, smiling and murmuring the name of his magical beast, Zhang. Through the door of the unfamiliar room, the elderly man who had helped him in the ritual appears. He informs Y that he is in his house and that before thinking about getting up freely, it would be better for him to rest a bit more as his body was still tired. Y disregards the warning and stands up to bow in gratitude to the long-bearded man. His pet was alive, and this was initially thanks to him. The elderly man now tells him not to worry about thanking him. The first thing would be for him to eat something, and he has brought him food. The protagonist takes the fried fish and devours it within seconds, unable to hide how hungry he feels at that moment. With his mouth full, he asks the elderly man how long he had been asleep after the ritual, and he responds that it had been 7 days. Y opens his eyes in astonishment at the amount of time he had been sleeping, and the elderly man responds that it had still seemed short to him as he estimated the boy to sleep for at least 10 days. But his premature awakening was due to his level of magic. Y understands then that the amount of hunger he feels is justified. Then a question crosses his mind that he hadn't asked until now. What was the name of this mysterious old man? The man introduces himself as Leolun, and the protagonist introduces himself as Y, which he hadn't done either. Leolun smiles and asks again if it is now okay for him to be his student. In this way, he would train and improve his light magic and also have the opportunity to inherit his legacy. The protagonist doesn't hesitate for more than a brief moment and automatically tells him that he does want to be his student because he had noticed that his magic was not yet strong enough. And he had noticed it thanks to the ritual he had performed 7 days ago. Y also tells him that he felt eager to become the strongest. The old man strokes his beard and tells him that he accepts him as his disciple and gives him his conditions for acceptance. The protagonist must become a legendary magister. Y, excited, tells him that he accepts and that he will give his all to become a great magister. Leolun has one more thing to say before they each continue with their lives. He will ask Y to take a break from school, and he will help him obtain the academy's consent. Y reacts in surprise and asks if the academy is open to discussion. Leolun smiles with an air of confidence and confesses that he is the dean of the academy. He still holds the title of honorary vice president of the Magister Union, so it won't be a problem. A month has passed since Leolun revealed his position in the academy. Y meets with the elderly man in the morning and informs him that his body was fully recovered and ready to begin training. His mentor is glad to hear that and says it's time to start with the lesson of the day. Leolun asks the protagonist about his magical power through meditation. But this question leaves Y feeling downcast as he is somewhat frustrated that his magical power has not grown for a long time, and he doesn't feel that meditation is the best way to break through that barrier. The old man, far from being disappointed in his student, tells him that his magical power is that of an intermediate level mage, which is not bad. Now Leolun tells him that he has a question to ask, capturing Y's attention, and his master begins to speak. First, he asks how much water and air a bottle can hold. To this, our protagonist responds that it strictly depends on the size of the bottle. Apparently, this answer satisfies the master, and he then asks a second question. Could an identical bottle hold the same amount of water and vapor as the previous one? Y again answers affirmatively, as it is a logical response. Leolin now poses his third and final question. What would happen if the water in one of those bottles evaporated? Would it still have the same amount? This completely perplexes Y, who has no answer to that question. The old man takes on a wise and friendly demeanor and tells the boy to consider understanding the riddle he just gave him, as part of his training depends on understanding his own magical powers. Once said, the master withdraws, wishing the young man can comprehend the game of the bottles as he did when he was young during his training. Y sits on the floor, pensive, and tries to relate the paradox of the bottles to magic. After a while, he believes he has found the answer. According to his understanding, he is the bottle in the example, and his magical power is what evaporates. So what he must achieve is to condense that vapor so that when it becomes liquid again, it can fit more into the bottle, that is, into himself. Now that he understands it, or at least that's what he believes, he decides to start meditating. But as the minutes pass, he realizes that his power cannot or does not want to be compressed, making his training more challenging. Y didn't give up and continued with his training, wishing to be able to complete it. Thanks to his concentration, he manages to connect with his ancestors, such as his uncles and aunts, and pleads for their assistance. The ancestral spirits join forces to help him. This brings joy to the protagonist, who becomes convinced that he has succeeded in his training. Now it's time to take a nap. Y recounts that while he was asleep, the space he had created within himself after successfully condensing his power was filled with new spirits of light, as had happened every time one of his training sessions proved satisfactory. In other words, his power increased. The next day, the protagonist wakes up to find his master visiting his room. Leolin appears slightly annoyed. Several questions cross his mind, one of them being how Y managed to decipher the paradox of the bottles and apply it to his training so quickly. Leolin begins to realize that this boy may be unique, that he could surpass him with time, and that there clearly is no one else like him on the entire continent. The old man approaches his student and observes him intently, noticing a change in him. He then tells Y to look in the mirror. Upon doing so, Y sees a slightly more adolescent face in his reflection. This leaves him perplexed, although it's enough for him to say that he now looks more handsome. His master explains that this is due to his successful compression of his magical power, with the spirits of light making changes to his body and aiding in its development. He also confesses that Y is the youngest student he has ever had and that he has reached such a level so quickly. All this spontaneous growth sparks curiosity in the protagonist, who seeks an explanation from his mentor as to why his ability is growing so rapidly. Leolin tells him that apparently, the spirits of light have begun to recognize him. Y now asks for an estimated time frame to fully compress the power of the spirits of light. The enigmatic old man tells him that it will all depend on the amount of time he takes to comprehend it, and once he does, the process will start to accelerate. So, if he strives hard enough, he should finish within 30 days or less. Next, the old man informs Y of his new objective. The first requirement is that before the month ends, Y must succeed in compressing his magical power. Once achieved, he should return to classes but never reveal what he knows to the rest of the students. Furthermore, once his magical power is fully compressed, it will be time to learn specific magical applications that he should be able to control to handle the competition. Having said that, Leolin proclaims himself a genius in the practice of magic and teaching. But in a comedic fashion, Y interrupts, saying that the true genius is actually himself. This slightly impatiences his master, who firmly reminds him that if it weren't for his help and dedication, Y wouldn't be in the position he is today. The master also threatens to teach him at such an accelerated pace that he would never be able to comprehend everything. Y apologizes to him and acknowledges that his teachings are excellent. Now the old man leaves the place and instructs Y to meditate. Now, Y's daily routine consisted of condensing his energy to work in conjunction with the spirits of light and increase his magical power. He only stopped for bathroom breaks. As the days passed, the spirits of light had successfully compressed themselves completely, and the protagonist had reached the desired breaking point. The ball of light was solid, and his power had grown. Being the bottle, he had managed to transform the vapor into water. Now, he set himself the goal of attracting more spirits of light to continue increasing his power, but he couldn't achieve it. On the other hand, Zyojin, his pet, had awakened from a deep sleep. The number of spirits of light attracted by the protagonist into his body had disrupted her deep slumber, and now the beast fed on them. By feeding on them, it allowed Y to attract more spirits and continue increasing his strength. Now he heads to his master to inform him that he seems to have achieved his goal. The old man then asks how he feels with this change, to which the protagonist explains that his magical power has compressed into a golden ball within him. but he is unsure if that is good or not. Leolun tells him not to worry, as that golden orb is the culmination of his magical power and will serve him in the study of magic. Y feels satisfied with the result and asks his mentor if he can now be considered a genius. But once again, his mentor responds angrily that he is not, and that he still has a long way to go. There is still much to learn. The protagonist nods and listens to his new lesson. Leolun explains that there are 6 magic orbs for each mage, and in Y's case, the color of his orb is golden since it comes from light magic. Now his mission was to turn his golden orb into a more transparent hue. After this, Y asks his mentor about the quantity and color he possesses, to which Leolun confesses to having only one magic orb, and it is transparent golden. He then informs him that only the greatest and most legendary mages manage to obtain the 6 transparent golden orbs, and this is what the mentor expects from his disciple. The protagonist feels excited by what he hears and assures Leolun that he can be certain he will achieve it. Then his master indicates that he should rest today and that tomorrow they will have a new lesson. After that, he will return to his regular classes with the rest of his classmates, and he can definitively prepare for the final exams. During the night, Y wakes up and is surprised by what he sees. A large, bright white serpent, 3 times his height, is standing in front of him with its eyes fixed on the protagonist. He feels somewhat intimidated and asks who it is. The serpent tells him that it is Xiaojin, his light beast. It looks different, not just because of its size, but also more mature, just like Y. Xiaojin is surprised, asking how Y doesn't recognize her. Y is astonished since now his supposed light beast can speak perfectly and in his own language. He asks why she has grown so much, and she responds that since the moment Y promised during the ritual that their lives would be connected, any growth in his magical power would directly impact his pet as well. Therefore, all the training Y had been undergoing in recent days had also been affecting his light beast. The young mage embraces his serpent and happily tells her that he is glad to see her well, and he will be happy as long as she is. He apologizes for forcing her to face Hong Hong in the past. The night passes without any further incidents. The next morning, Leolun meets with Y to begin practicing. He informs him that they only have the next 7 days to learn useful magic, so he intends to make the most of every moment seriously. To start, his master tells him that he needs to know how much the boy knows about advanced magic theory and if he knows how to use magic of his level. Y responds that he believed all magic is invoked in the same way regardless of the level. But that was a mistake. Leolun demonstrates his power. With just a stretch of his arm, a gust of wind generated by the movement hits a rock on the ground, breaking it into 2. Our protagonist is extremely surprised by what he had just witnessed and asks his mentor how it was possible to break a rock with a simple hand movement. The old man explains that what he had just seen was the pinnacle of ordinary magic, achieved through his deep understanding of magic, meaning that by merely thinking about what he wanted to do, he could accomplish it. Y is amazed by his master's immense power and, at the same time, a little frightened by it. He thinks that it's best not to anger him in the future if he didn't want to have a hard time. Leolun tells his student that for the time being, he only knows a few advanced attack spells, but what is really important at the moment is for him to learn defensive magic. Later on, they would also start practicing elemental control. Now, they should focus on perfecting the first spell. And so, the practice of the Dean of the Chain and our protagonist began. 7 days later, Y returns to the academy. His teacher welcomes him warmly and stands him in front of the class to show all the students that he's back. Of course, his friend Michael is the happiest, waving his arm and shouting boss at him. Once the protagonist reaches his seat, Hua suddenly appears behind him and whispers in his ear that she had heard a rumor about him becoming the disciple of the Dean of the Academy, which is what had kept him absent for so long. She also mentions that she had been chosen as the disciple of the Vice Dean. Y turns around and congratulates his friend with a smile, to which Michael, with a somewhat arrogant attitude, tells him that they both are the pride of the Academy. Suddenly, the teacher interrupts their conversation, announcing that she will now explain the rules of the final course exam. The first rule states that the use of the students' magical beasts is prohibited. The second rule indicates that the top 100 students, the best of them, will have their well-deserved vacation, while the next 100 must stay and study at the academy while the others rest. The third rule states that the matchups will be determined by a draw. Rule number 4 states that the students will be grouped into teams of 10 and will have 9 duels, with the top 5 from each group advancing. The fifth rule deals with how to win or lose the duels, knocking out or weakening the opponent, pushing them out of the combat arena, or causing them to surrender are reasons for victory. In case of a tie within the regulated time, a referee will decide the fair winner. The penultimate rule, number 6, suggests that if a challenger succeeds, they will be able to skip 1 year of school. And finally, the 7th rule concerns the rewards and states that the champions will receive 100 diamond coins as a prize, while the runners-up will receive half of that. The teacher also clarifies some details, such as if the losers challenge the champions or runners-up and manage to defeat them, they will receive double the reward. Finally, she informs the students that 5th and 6th year students who become champions will be able to automatically enter the Royal Academy of Advanced Magic. Also, in case a student from lower years challenges these champions and wins, they will enjoy the same benefits as them. Once the explanation of the rules and prizes of the final magic exam is finished, the teacher announces that the class is over and they can leave the classroom. In Y's mind, there is only one thought: to win this championship at all costs, to surprise his mother and father when he returns home. Michael and Y leave the classroom, and as they walk through a corridor of the academy, they are approached by an older student. He approaches shouting the protagonist's name to get his attention. Once he is close enough, he informs Y that since the moment he battled with Hai Rai and managed to endure so much on the battlefield, he has gained the admiration of all the second-year students. This person also tells Y that he is eager to have a fair match with him. Once all of this is said, the young man bids farewell to our two beloved characters, greeting them politely, and says that he will wait for the protagonist in the arena. Both of them stand there, looking at him and wondering if they know him from somewhere, but neither of them remembers him from any specific place. Curiously, Michael asks his friend what the true intentions of this boy might be, and Y responds that he honestly didn't know, but they should be cautious because he was very powerful. After the break and lunch, Michael meets with the protagonist again and tries to convince him to tell him what the dean had taught him so far. But Y respects the promise he made to his master and tells his friend that he unfortunately can't talk about it because it's a secret. As they continue walking through the academy courtyard, they come across Rai and Yu, who slowly approach their location after the girl spots the protagonist and tells her brother to greet him. When they face each other, Rai speaks up and apologizes to Y for what happened with his magical beast during their confrontation. She confesses that it was something she had always wanted to do but hadn't had the chance since she hadn't seen him in person until that moment. She also congratulates him, noticing some improvement in him. Y lowers his head and listens to the apologies but doesn't respond. Once the older student falls silent, the protagonist walks past him and continues walking as if there was no one there. Then he abruptly stops and, in a threatening tone, tells him that he will see him in the arena later, and this time he won't lose to him. Rai doesn't seem surprised by the protagonist's anger and simply observes him as he walks away. A few meters ahead, Michael congratulates Y for his serious and decisive attitude towards Rai. Then he says he feels very tired and that he has eaten enough to be full, so he decides to go to sleep. As night falls, Y is sitting on his bed with his eyes closed, meditating to concentrate his power. All the students in the room are doing the same. There isn't anyone who doesn't want to prepare for the final exam in the best possible way. Suddenly, a voice echoes in the protagonist's head, and he immediately recognizes it. It's his teacher, Leolun, calling him, indicating that he should approach him. He is outside his room, specifically on the school field. Upon leaving his room and heading to the field, Y is pleased to meet his teacher, so he hesitantly asks him why he was looking for him. Leolun doesn't answer his question and, without saying a word, begins to touch the young man in search of something that could be hidden in his clothes. The elder eventually tells him that he disagrees with his way of dressing, so he leads him to his office. Once they arrive, they both stand in front of the older man's wardrobe, and he takes out a white cape with beautiful aesthetic details from inside. Leolun tells the protagonist that it is his favorite cape and that he inherited it from his own master, and now he is passing it on to his disciple. Y opens his eyes in astonishment. He really liked the garment he was being given, but he was unsure if the size would be right. At his teacher's request, he tries on the garment. After putting it on, he realizes that it fits him perfectly. It turns out to be a magical cape with the property of adapting to the body of whoever wears it. Another significant detail is that before buttoning it, the buttons appear as two magical stones, and when they are fastened, they become one that shines brightly. Leolun watches his student turn and admire himself in his new cape. It is clear that he likes it a lot. However, in his mind, there is only room for one thought, and that is that he must pass the exam successfully. That is the reason why they are gathered at that moment to discuss it. In the afternoon, the groups and numbers for the exam are drawn. Our protagonist is selected in group 11, and he is number 4. As he processes this information, his friend Michael appears on the scene. But before he can say anything, he notices Y's new clothes. The redhead's eyes begin to sparkle, and he showers Y's cape with praise. Michael couldn't hide his interest and how much he liked the protagonist's magical cape, so he asks him where he got it from. Y responds that his teacher Leilun gave it to him as a gift, and this drives Michael crazy as hope grows inside him that his own teacher will do the same for him. This leads him to run as fast as possible towards his teacher's quarters to check if there is a magical cape for him. Before leaving, he promises to return in time to wish the protagonist luck with his exam. Moments later, through the loudspeakers, the call for the students who are about to face each other in the final tests begins to be heard. Y approaches the platform where he will measure his strength against another student. His opponent was already waiting for him there. The opponent introduces himself as Feng Yang, a wind element mage from Class B. The protagonist also introduces himself, and then the announcer indicates that it is time to start the duel. Feng Yang takes the initiative by summoning the free winds and ordering them to transform into a violent tornado. Y adopts a much more serious attitude, one that he rarely shows. He takes his magic scepter and before unleashing his first attack, he tells himself that if that was all his opponent's power, he wouldn't take long to win the duel, and he was right. The protagonist begins with a defensive space magic and opens a portal on one side of his opponent's tornado. Then he causes that portal to completely absorb the giant whirlwind that was approaching him violently. The spectators and even his opponent were astonished by the demonstration of the boy's control over spatial magic. Once the wind spell was no longer present on the battlefield, Feng Yang surrenders to the protagonist with a defeated air. Y asks him if he still wants to continue the battle, but he receives a resounding no as an answer. Feng Yang surrenders, making Y the winner. But before leaving, his rival tells him that he won this time, but he will meet him again someday and defeat him. During the afternoon, Y faced several opponents, but none of them managed to have an evenly matched duel with him. He disqualified all of them with just one attack. Now it was time to face the last remaining participant from his group. His final battle would be against a somewhat disheveled young man with messy gray hair and pronounced dark circles. His appearance caused a bit of intimidation for both Y and the onlookers. Y approaches him timidly and introduces himself as he had done in each of his duels. But this time, the courtesy is not reciprocated, and his rival, without even mentioning his name, simply says, "Let's begin." The disheveled youth leans forward slightly and starts gathering strength in place, recharging his magical power. Y steps back, intrigued and for safety. Once his opponent feels ready, he unleashes his energy, summoning endless flames and commanding them to burn everything in their path. The protagonist doesn't have enough time to protect himself as he would have liked, but he manages to create his characteristic light shield. And with great effort, he can withstand the fiery attack from his enigmatic rival. After seeing that his defensive maneuver is successful, the rival clenches his teeth in frustration. But he has another plan. Y's opponent goes to extreme measures and decides to exchange his own vitality in order to multiply his magical power, using a spell that burns his life force. The spectators become concerned by what they see and hear. It's an overly extreme move for this stage of his life, as he is sacrificing his life force just to launch a more powerful attack and incapacitate the protagonist. Some of the spectators even scold him for such foolishness. However, the disheveled boy pays no heed to their advice. He knows that by sacrificing his own life, he can instantly elevate his magic to a level Z. Y realizes that he is not afraid to risk his own life in order to perform well in the exam, so he has no choice but to get serious as well. The protagonist closes his eyes and focuses, then asks the spirits of light to lend him their great power and fill the earth with their brilliant light. These spirits grant him two angel-like wings to float above the platform, making it easier for him to dodge his opponent's attacks. They also surround his body with a golden sphere to repel any attacks that may harm him. The expectant students agree that this boy's power is incredible, as he demonstrates the ability to invoke level Z magic while being only a second-year student. Y, levitating in the air, carefully observes his opponent's next attack, but the disheveled boy sighs tiredly and starts coughing as he falls to his knees on the platform. This piques Y's curiosity because it appears that this person did not want to continue the fight and decided to surrender when he could have attacked. But just in case, with a kind heart, the protagonist asks the spirits of light to heal his opponent, while three other students help him off the stage and escort him directly to the infirmary, reproaching him for using such a foolish move as burning his life force. Our light mage descends from the air and, standing on solid ground, hears the competition announcer declare him the first place finisher in the group, qualifying him for the next round. Charlie Ayotte, his recent rival, also secures a spot in the next round as the second place finisher in the group. Before leaving the venue, Y acknowledges that Aot is a person with incredible powers. The evening passes, but before the sun sets, the protagonist heads to his teacher's home. He updates Leolun on everything that happened during the entire competition. The elder reacts with anger and reproaches both Aot's actions and those of his student. He couldn't understand how the young ones freely used magic that burned their life force. In his youth, it was not like that. But the reprimand for his student was different. Y had used level C magic and had demonstrated great power. This could work against him, as now no one would dare to challenge him. His student justifies himself, saying that he couldn't withstand the opponent's attack and was forced to use a certain ability. But when he used it, he couldn't control his immature light orbs. This response doesn't appease his teacher's mood, as he remains infuriated. It's the best time for Y to leave the place. After a few days, the protagonist was among the top 4 students of his year, just as his mentor had predicted. No one dared to challenge him after witnessing his magical power demonstration. Therefore, he didn't have to exert himself at all. The other 3 students in the quartet of the year's best were his friend Michael, Woke, and a young water mage. The next day, it was time to start the semifinals. The announcer on the microphone announces the 2 matchups. On one side, the young water mage will face Woke, and in the other semifinal, Michael and Y will face each other. Our protagonist and his best friend step onto the platform. The redhead laments having to face his friend at this stage and asks for mercy from Y. But the protagonist gives Michael hope by saying that there's always a possibility that he won't win the duel. Both agree that they will give their best as if their lives depended on this battle. The dispute begins, and Michael is the first to make a move. He summons the fire spirits and asks them to form a dragon of the same element to defeat his opponent as quickly as possible. On the other hand, Y uses defensive light magic and, thanks to the spirits of that element, invokes a ring that halts the flames of the dragon's attack. Michael's giant dragon ceases its attack and retreats, awaiting orders from its summoner. Y knows that Michael is a tough opponent. Now, the protagonist's friend smiles and says that he will use his final move. This surprises Y, as he didn't expect the battle to be so short. So now, Michael presents a magical staff before his rival's eyes and the spectators. From outside the boundaries of the combat platform, a voice that Y knows well expresses surprise upon seeing this. It was his mentor, Leolun, who had arrived in time to witness the battle, but now he appeared concerned because of Michael's staff. Leolun says it was the wrath of the fire god. From one end of the stands, the protagonist's mentor shouts at the vice dean of the academy, asking how he could have given that fire staff to Michael, that belonged to the Department of Magic Defense. The vice dean, who is also Michael's mentor, calmly responds to Leolun that he had given his student the robe of the god of light as a gift. In this way, he makes it clear that they were even. Meanwhile, on the combat platform, Y comes to the conclusion that his current opponent's fire staff amplifies the magical power of the wielder. That seemed to work against him, but there was a way to counter it as Y noticed something else. The pure fire energy concentrated in Michael's staff had incredible offensive power, but it lacked defensive magic to protect him. So Y concentrates and begins to ask the light spirits for their power to face this battle. Michael notices the movement that Y is making and hastens his attack by launching a fireball. Perhaps not large in size, but very powerful as all the pure energy is concentrated in it. This fireball collides with the light shield that Y had previously invoked, and it doesn't hold up as the protagonist had hoped. It starts to crack slowly. The young light mage steps back, extending his arms to exert more force and make his shield hold a little longer, but he knows he won't be able to withstand his counterpart's attack. Before the light shield collapses, mysteriously, the stone on Y's magical cape begins to shine brightly. Michael notices this and seems somewhat worried. Leolun also sees it and immediately reacts, shouting at his disciple to quickly pour all the excess magic into the stone. Y obeys his master's orders and channels all the remaining power into that point of the garment. Now things begin to change. The boy's resilience seems to grow, and he slowly starts advancing, gradually countering the pure energy fireball shot by his friend's staff. Michael can't believe how the duel turns unfavorable for him within seconds. The magical forces begin to intensify, seeking to win this battle. But with so much power, suddenly, an immensely powerful explosion takes over the scene, leaving everyone blinded by its white light. When the explosion dissipates and everyone regains their sight, we see Y standing upright and panting, but still on his feet. In front of him, Michael lies on the ground with his arms spread wide and a smile on his face, saying that despite all his effort, he lost. But he's still glad it was against his boss. Y approaches after hearing these words and tells his friend that his progress has been tremendous, and next time, the loser could be him. Their brief conversation is interrupted by the announcer, who loudly declares that the winner of the semifinal is Zhang Gong. Immediately after the fight has ended, the protagonist's master rushes onto the platform and, alarmed, asks if he is injured. But the answer is clear to see. Then Y tells him that he hasn't embarrassed him, and Leolun gives him a smile, affectionately calling him a brat. Now he takes him by the shoulders and tells him to accompany him home, where he will heal his wounds. The sun shines high in the sky, and it's time to start a new day for our protagonist, who was already sitting on his bed, stretching. But he doesn't get to finish what he's doing when an anxious voice tells him that he had finally woken up and that there was something to tell him. Michael had surprisingly fallen quickly in his duel that morning. Y rubs his eyes and realizes what he's hearing, asking the young boy to repeat what he had just said. Now this young student begins to tell him a bit more in detail about the situation. It turns out that Michael that morning had faced off in a duel with the mysterious water mage who had also made it to the top 4, just like him. Right from the start of the fight, this girl used a water magic that none of the spectators had seen before. And with that spell, she managed to trap the redhead in a water bubble that rendered him unable to move. And that's how she defeated him, just like that. Y gets off his bed, surprised by what he's hearing. It was hard for him to believe that his friend had lost so quickly in such a decisive battle. Now, this young visitor in his room entrusts the protagonist with the task of emerging victorious when he faces the water mage. Y accepts the mission, but before doing or saying anything on his own, he heads to his mentor's house. Once there, he finds his master, who tells him that he was waiting for him because he knew that upon hearing the news of Michael's defeat, he would come running to see him. Without wasting time, Y asks his superior for explanations. He needed to know how his friend had lost the battle. But Leolun ignores the question and instead surprisingly responds that when facing the water mage the next day, he should automatically surrender without fighting. This impresses the protagonist, who can't hide his curiosity, and he asks his master how powerful that girl could be. Leolun reveals the mage's identity to him. Her name was Shui Ying Rai, the younger sister of Hai Rai. After revealing this, Leolun begins to tell him a bit of history. Leolun explains that each family has a magical inheritance from their ancestors. The Rai family is the oldest in the kingdom they live in, Axias. The peculiarity of this magical seal is that only a person who is a member of that family can inherit it by generation. And regardless of the strength of the user who inherits it, every time that magical seal is used, 1/3 of its power would be consumed. In other words, that magical power can only be used 3 times a day, but with those 3 times, it would be enough for the user who possesses that seal to engage in a duel. Leolun now gives a tip to his student, saying that as long as Shui Ying uses her uncertain storm, there is no possibility that any student from that academy can defeat her. He also apologizes and asks him not to think that it is something against him, but unfortunately, it is the reality. Despite this, the old man tells him that he hopes to see him victorious and that he can now leave after obtaining all that information. As the protagonist leaves his quarters, he opens a large book titled Secrets of the Female Mage. The next day, the big moment had arrived for our protagonist. It was time to face Shui Ying, who, according to rumors, would be the toughest opponent they had ever faced in their life. The announcer invites both participants to enter the dueling area. Leolun, who accompanies his student to the platform, holds him by the shoulders and asks him to please be very careful with that girl. Their opponent was already on the platform with her master behind her, waiting for the protagonist to join. Y approaches her and observes her for a moment. The girl with blue hair was very beautiful, but there was something about her sad gaze that caught his attention. The announcer calls our protagonist for the second time, inviting him to step onto the dueling field so that they can begin. Y greets his opponent, introducing himself as he always does with his name and surname. But all he receives from the girl is a cold hello. Now they stood face to face, and it was time to show why they had reached that stage. But neither of them attacked, they simply observed each other respectfully, waiting for the other's move. The protagonist formulated a strategy in his mind, realizing that if he kept his distance from her, he would have a better chance to attack. Once he had analyzed this, he made the first offensive move. With almost imperceptible speed, Y teleports behind the girl with blue hair, and once he is behind her, he extends his arms and summons a light magic attack in the form of a beam that aims directly at the water mage's body. Apparently, he didn't manage to deceive the girl, even though his move was noticeably fast. She was able to track Y's teleportation with her eyes, so the protagonist's attack did not catch her by surprise. The mage was equally fast in summoning a water shield, which managed to block the light beam from the boy. But apparently, this was what the protagonist wanted to achieve. Now the light mage intentionally deflects his attack towards one end of the shield and, still controlling it, manages to make it bounce quickly around the platform. This disorients the girl, as no matter where she looks, beams of light quickly envelop her from all sides. The beam of light continues bouncing for a few more seconds until it finally reaches its target. Like an arrowhead, it hits near the girl's right armpit, giving Y hope that he had managed to knock her down or at least inflict some damage with his attack. The water mage now fixes her gaze on him, but it's not the sad and innocent look she had before stepping onto the platform. Her face has transformed into one that could frighten anyone. The expression of anger is evident, and Y's attack has only managed to annoy her. The attacker now steps back, waiting for his opponent's response. Shui Ying closes her eyes and concentrates her power. Suddenly, a mysterious golden aura begins to envelop her. This immediately unsettles Y. He feels completely dizzy, his body trembles, and he feels like he can't withstand that horrible sensation. From outside the battle perimeter, Leolun stands up, looking very surprised, and says that the mage is not only capable of using the dreaded uncertain storm, but she can also use the Song of the Water Dragon, the second of the 3 great water abilities of the Xing family. Shui Ying stretches out her hand, which starts to be covered by something resembling a bubble in its transparent color. Once the bubble completely covers her hand, she hurls it towards the protagonist. The ball disintegrates, forming a water whirlwind that begins to batter Y forcefully. The boy wonders if that is the power of the uncertain storm or not. But it matters little now because he feels that he cannot withstand that attack since his magical power has suddenly diminished drastically without any explanation. From the other end of the platform, the attractive young girl smiles with a victorious air. After this, the water gusts that were hitting the light mage start to merge with each other, forming a gigantic circle that traps him inside, rendering him unable to move. Y knows that it's only a matter of time until he loses the duel because he is unable to gather light spirits. Suddenly, he feels something inside him that both bothers and surprises him. Xiaojin, his magical beast, awakens. Y thinks this can't be happening because she was sealed, but he can't continue thinking because a sharp headache interrupts him and makes him scream. The scream of our protagonist is so loud that it pierces through the water circle surrounding him and can be heard from outside. Shui Ying opens her eyes in surprise because she knows very well that her uncertain storm attack leaves her enemies stunned, taking away all their offensive power. But this time, it wasn't the case. Apparently, her opponent was starting to defend himself. This causes her to lose concentration on the next water attack she was charging between her hands. Leolun, once again, is surprised, but this time it's because of his student. While he searches for an explanation for what is happening, he notices that Y somehow manages to dissolve the water sphere surrounding him and effortlessly exits it, levitating in the air. As the remnants of the water sphere vanish, we can see Y floating just inches above the ground, with a glowing light emanating from his forehead, as if he had a third eye. Y opens his eyes and murmurs the words "magic seal breaking," simultaneously with his master, who is several meters away. While everyone present is impressed by the extraordinary battle unfolding before them, Leolun explains that the ability his disciple is using can only be activated by individuals of the dragon race. This race is by far the most powerful on the entire continent, and even high-ranking dragons are capable of using magic as if they were mages. Dragons are also much more intelligent than humans and not at all friendly towards them. The only way a dragon would accept a human is if they considered them as powerful as themselves, which rarely happens. Currently, there are only about 300 dragons alive in the world, each of them over 1,000 years old. Nowadays, they are almost considered a myth, and dragon sightings have not occurred for a long time. In fact, the number of humans who have witnessed dragons is scarce. Returning to the combat zone, we see Y's levitation come to an end, and his feet touch the platform again. His eyes change from the gray and vacant tone they had moments ago to their original honey color. The protagonist says that he has regained consciousness and is determined to win the battle. Shui Ying is pale after this involuntary display from her rival, and her distraction causes her to lose sight of him. The boy teleports again at incredible speed and appears behind her. The girl manages to see him at the same time that the light mage extends his arms and pushes her off the platform, bringing the battle to an end once and for all. The body of the young water mage is thrown backwards, and she can do nothing to prevent it, as it was a very fast movement. And at the same time, she couldn't understand how her opponent had easily escaped one of her most powerful attacks. So, she ends up sitting on the ground outside the platform. Y looks down at the floor and feels embarrassed about the method he just used to disqualify his opponent and win the battle. He would have preferred for Shui Ying to surrender due to an excellent display of magic on his part, or at least to have been able to fight a little longer and defeat her with his magical power, as he had done in his previous duel against Michael. The announcer approaches to verify the position of each duelist, and now that he is sure the girl is completely outside the bounds of the combat field, he declares the young light mage as the winner of the fight, even though he can barely stand after using so much magical power to break Shui Ying's magic seal. Without wasting a moment, Michael jumps onto the platform and approaches his best friend, embracing him and congratulating him on his recent victory. Shui Ying had humiliated him within seconds in their duel, and now Y, his boss as he calls him, had avenged him. As Michael jumps around, calling Y his idol, Y collapses in place, with only one thought in mind: sleep. As the protagonist closes his eyes, losing consciousness, he faintly hears the voice of the red-haired friend calling for help and requesting that he be urgently taken inside the building for treatment. Now we move to Y's mind, where he is experiencing a curious dream in which he finds himself riding on the back of a creature that appears to be a giant flying serpent soaring through the night sky. However, he doesn't get to comprehend any of this, as his bodily pains are so intense and agonizing that he wakes up just as the dream is beginning. Upon opening his eyes, he finds himself in his master's room, wondering how he ended up there since he doesn't recall anything that happened. Leolan's voice can be heard from a distance, asking how he feels, while his footsteps draw nearer. The protagonist smiles as he sees his master enter the room and responds that he doesn't feel too bad or in pain, just tired. Afterward, he asks how he ended up there. The old man replies that he brought him to his home because he couldn't wait for him to wake up to ask him a question that he would hear shortly. Leolan wants to know how Y managed to break the magic seal during the final battle. Y looks at him with confusion and says he has no idea what the magic seal is. Leolan puts on his best poker face and remains silent for a moment, then asks again in a slightly less friendly tone of voice. How is it possible that he doesn't know what a magic seal is when he himself managed to break Shui Ying's seal during the battle? Y still doesn't understand what he's talking about. Now the old man explains to his apprentice what happened, hoping to refresh his memory and get a better response from him. When Y was trapped by Shui Ying's uncertain storm, a kind of bright halo appeared above his head and managed to break the magic seal that was preventing him from moving freely, and would soon render him unable to fight. That glow broke the magic seal of that attack and put him back on the platform as if nothing had happened. Only dragons of high rank can use that magic seal breaking ability. Y sits on the bed, determined, and says that he's starting to remember part of what happened. He recalls the glow on his head and how he escaped from the water mage spell, but nothing more than that. He then asks his master if that is really important to remember, and Leolan replies, yes, absolutely. Apparently, this conversation was not leading anywhere, so the old man decides to ask the protagonist a more direct question and says if he has ever made a pact with a dragon or a member of their clan. Y says no, that he had never encountered a dragon before and that Zyojin had always been his only pet. Leolan ponders for a moment after hearing the name of the boy's pet. Then he turns and fixes his eyes on Zyojin, asking, with a touch of mystery, what if his pet turned out to be a dragon and not a serpent? Zyojin lifts its head upon hearing its name and looks at the humans curiously. Then the master receives the question from his student, who asks if there's a possibility that his light beast is actually a dragon. Leolan thinks for a moment and responds that as far as he knows, dragons have 4 legs, or at least 2, and they also have claws. However, he cannot confirm this since he only relies on hearsay, and has never been in the presence of a dragon. Y is excited and a little confused by his mentor's words as Leolan retreats to the adjacent room. Leolan suggests a bit of patience as he plans to search for the book with information about dragons to clear up some doubts that have arisen after a long time without rereading it. After a few moments, he returns to his disciple with a book in hand titled The True Kings of the Dragons of the Continent. He opens it and begins flipping through the pages in search of a particular one. Upon finding it and reading it, he fixes his gaze on the protagonist of this story and tells him that if what the book shows is real, he may have found a true treasure. Y stretches his neck to read the same thing his master is reading. The page in the book reads as follows. The golden dragon with 5 claws is known as the King of Dragons, or also as the Dragon God. Its lifespan is around 20,000 years, but at 15,000 years, it begins to search for the most beautiful female dragon to mate with, and she will then gestate the next generation of the dragon for 1,000 years. This offspring would be the heir to the Dragon God after spending 3,000 years growing and developing until they are ready to take their father's place, who will retire and move on to a better life. In this way, there will only be one dragon per generation suitable to assume the position of the king. After finishing reading this page of the book, the protagonist asks hopefully if it is possible that Xiaojin is the heir of the dragon god. Leolin doesn't have the answer to that question, but he tells Why that if it were the case, they would have to wait for about 3,000 years to find out, and by that time, both of them would likely be dust. But the book also stated that dragons took around 600 years to reach the juvenile phase. However, in Xiaojin's case, in just 1 year, it had almost completed its childhood stage and was entering the growth phase. After saying this, Leolin realizes that it was highly likely that by making a contract and sharing his life with his pet, Y unintentionally accelerated its growth. Coincidentally, since that moment, Xiaojin had not stopped growing and absorbing magic indiscriminately. To conclude the conversation, the old man tells his apprentice that when Xiaojin enters the growth stage, it will grow legs and claws that will be very useful for self-defense, and at that time, he won't have to fear dueling with others. Indeed, the protagonist had found a treasure. Y stands up on his bed and raises his arms in celebration, shouting excitedly that his pet is a dragon. But as a party pooper, his master interrupts his celebration, telling him that he shouldn't rejoice so much because the book said something else that he must know. So Y puts his celebration on hold and pays attention to what the old man has to say. It turns out that on the last page of the book, there was a map and instructions on how to reach the distant land where dragons ruled. Therefore, it was Y's responsibility to go there to meet the Dragon King and his wife, and then find out if they wanted to reclaim their child. If the latter was the case, Y would have to leave the magical beast in their kingdom and depart from the place. The protagonist clearly disagreed with this measure and asked his master if he really had to give Xiaojin back. Leolin responded that he must understand how painful it must be for parents to lose their child. Then he left. Y turns and gazes at his magical beast, proud to know that it is a dragon. They got along very well, and their lives were happy, but the protagonist was not a selfish person and put himself in his own parents' shoes. How would they feel if he were to disappear? After a moment of reflection, he tells Xiaojin that once he graduates, they will embark on a journey to the land ruled by dragons, and he will do everything possible to convince the dragon god to let Xiaojin stay with him for the rest of its life. Now the protagonist lies back down to rest his exhausted body a little longer. While generating a small ball of light energy in his hand, he thinks that in just 2 days, his first master, Zhu, would come to the academy to pick him up and take him to the village with his family. Y eagerly awaits his master, expecting to surprise him greatly with how much he has progressed and increased his light magic and spatial magic powers. The memory of his parents is also in his mind, wondering if they miss him. He certainly misses them a lot. 2 days later, what the protagonist had been waiting for happens. As he leaves the academy, his beloved master Zhu is standing in front of him. He had come to pick him up and take him to his home with his mother and father. Y runs excitedly into his arms, saying it's a pleasure to see him and thanking him for coming. While they walk together, Y asks Zhu if he had any news about his parents. His master responds that before coming for him, he had visited his parents' house, and both of them were doing well, thankfully, and eager to see him again. This delights Y, who wasn't expecting any news other than that. Now it's Zhu who asks a question, wanting to know how his best student was doing at the academy. Y confesses that he had been promoted to the 2nd year and tells him all about his best friend, the red-haired Michael. He also brings him up to date in great detail about everything he had experienced recently as they venture together into a forest on their way home. They laughed and caught up on everything they had to share. But after walking for a while, deep into the thickets, they are ambushed by a group of muscular bandits with large sabers that would frighten anyone. Zhu asks the boy to wait a moment as he will be the first to advance towards the place and try to negotiate with the ruffians or at least find out what they wanted. When Zhu is close enough, he challengingly asks the wrongdoers what is going on, and they respond with a threatening tone that they are extremely bored and want to have some fun with a woman. This is an obvious taunt to the elder light mage, who is not at all offended and ignores the comment. Now one of the thieves says that they will only let them leave if they hand over all the money they have. Zhu cordially accepts and takes out a simple coin from his pocket, placing it in the man's hand. The bandit who had taken the coin from the instructor seems to become enraged and throws it to the ground in a gesture of annoyance. He then looks at Zhu and repeats his demand to give him everything he has, as he considers a single coin to be a mockery. If he doesn't obey, he will have to deal with him and all his brothers who are eagerly waiting behind him, ready to attack. Zhu calmly asks him to wait a moment as he goes to get more coins. He then turns and walks towards where his apprentice was waiting for him. When he reaches him, Y asks what is happening with those individuals. The master tells him not to worry, as they are just simple thieves with magic power far below his own. So he invites Y to face them alone, in what would be his first real fight outside the academy's training grounds. At first, the protagonist doesn't agree with this idea and questions his superior's decision, asking if it is really necessary for him to do it. Zhu responds affirmatively, explaining that through his confrontations, his magic would grow. It was a form of training. Zhu promises to watch his back from a distance. Y remains hesitant but feels a push on his back that propels him directly towards where the bad men are. Now the protagonist is facing a hostile group of armed men. Y, feeling very nervous, greets them and tells them that as they can see, they have no more money to give, so he kindly asks if they would let them go. The leader of the bandits yells at him to shut up and raises his arm to strike the boy in the face. Swiftly and unnoticed, the protagonist takes a 3-meter step backward, easily evading the attack. This leaves the bandit perplexed, who alerts the group that they are facing a true mage and that the best strategy in this case would be for everyone to attack him at once. So they all rush towards the boy. Y has only a few seconds to make a decision on how to act, so he chooses to fight against the group. As usual, he politely summons the light spirits that grant him his elemental power to create the same spell he had used to attack the Water Mother 3 days ago, the Arrow of Light. While the arrow bounces through the forest grass, seeking a target to hit, the wrongdoers begin to move away, trying to avoid the attack without knowing that whatever they do would be in vain. The protagonist's light magic has a dual effect. Firstly, it partially blinds the enemies, rendering them unable to see and defend themselves against the spell. And secondly, the arrow's tip sends them flying through the air. The protagonist is completely surprised by how easy it had been to emerge victorious from that fight. His first real fight against bad guys. He then returns to Zhu seeking his approval. Now his master is astonished by his abilities and asks him what magic he had used. The boy responds that it was called Light Division and confesses that it was his most powerful magic to date. Zhu tells him that it wasn't necessary to use his strongest magic against a simple group of bandits, but he understands it because the boy had been very scared since it was a real fight. Zhu also supports this reaction, as ultimately the group of people were bad and deserved to encounter someone who puts them in their place. His master congratulates him, noting that his magical powers had grown significantly. With the path cleared, they continue on their way to Y's home. Upon arriving, to the protagonist's surprise, his mother is waiting for him with a smile in the garden of their home, and as soon as she notices him in the distance, she calls out his name. Y can't hide the excitement he feels. His tears are evidence of this emotion. He runs to embrace her, and as they come together, they express how much they missed each other during this academic period of the protagonist. Now another voice congratulates him for achieving first place in the final exam. When he turns around, Y sees his father standing behind him, which obviously brings him great joy. The family embraces and aligns, demonstrating the unity they have always had. Together, they walk into their home, where, according to the protagonist's mother, his favorite meals are waiting for him. On the other hand, his father says that after eating, he would love to hear about all the adventures his son has experienced during his absence from home. Y enjoys the well-deserved rest from the magical world as he deserves, but he knows that after enjoying this family gathering, a new journey to the land of the dragons awaits him. Our protagonist's vacation passed very quickly in his opinion, but sooner or later they had to come to an end. It was already time to return to the capital to continue his academic studies about magic. Zhang Gong leaves his parents' house and, grateful for everything they had shared up to that point, turns around and smiles as he waves goodbye to his parents. On one hand, his mother asks him to take care of himself, and on the other hand, his father, who is a bit more demanding, tells him that the next time they see each other, he must still be the best in his class. Then, it's informed to the protagonist that his teacher Zhu had already left the town before, and for this reason, he must continue his journey alone to the school. Y responds to them not to worry, as he feels capable of making the journey back alone. Some time later, the boy arrives at the school without any issues. The first thing he sees upon his return is the number of students who, like him, were returning from their small vacations. Every time he returned from them, he felt like 5 years had passed in the blink of an eye since his studies had started at the Royal Academy of Intermediate Magic. And thanks to this time, today he enjoyed a strong foundation of magical knowledge. In the afternoon, Y heads to his teacher's place, knocks on the door to see if he's inside, and without waiting for a response, he enters the home. Inside was his teacher, who doesn't seem very surprised to see him back from his vacation. The teacher tells him that he will soon graduate and asks about his intentions after that. Y firmly states that once his studies conclude at that academy, he will focus on studying at the Royal Academy of Advanced Magic. And although it might seem very strange, this makes Leolun say that he doesn't want that. This unexpected reaction from the protagonist's teacher not only perplexes him but also forces him to ask why he believed he shouldn't attend that academy. Leolun responds that if he truly wanted to follow in his footsteps to become the strongest, he shouldn't take that path, or otherwise, he would never surpass him. This leaves the boy a bit confused and annoyed since he was confident in his excessive power, and believed that thanks to this and his young age, it was inevitable that he would surpass his teacher. The old man now begins to explain to his student why he says that. He starts by informing that his current age is 83 years, and the dean is younger than him, being 62 years old. Despite his age, the dean had become a master at 30, but since that moment, he hadn't made any positive progress. Then he asks his student if he knew the reason for this. Y was listening and observing attentively. He responds that he has no idea. Then Leolun tells him that for thousands of years, magisters and more magisters have appeared on the continent, but none of them had reached the rank of mage. Y awaited exactly the same fate as them. Once his magical level reaches that of a magister, he will encounter a new bottleneck. From that moment on, he will only be able to improve his magical skills and magical foundation. But what he won't be able to do is increase his level of magical power. The protagonist's face expresses discouragement, and with a bit of timidity, he asks his teacher if that bottleneck would truly be so difficult to overcome. And if that's the case, he is done for. The old man responds that many have tried to overcome that bottleneck until now, but all have failed. He then concludes by saying that if he studies at the Royal Academy of Advanced Magic, he knows very well that the boy won't be able to increase his magical powers, and this would leave him disheartened and lead him to give up on magic. Leolun now tells his apprentice that he has other methods to suggest to him through which he could become a magister. Y now seems happy and excitedly asks what he needs to do that he will do without problems. The old man sees the boy's interest and then begins to explain what he should do. To start, he must still attend the Royal Academy of Advanced Magic, but not immediately. Before that, the protagonist will have to go out and experience the outside world for a few years. Y seems satisfied with what he hears since he also desires to explore the outside world. But that's not all, the teacher had something more to inform him. Leolun now tells him that while exploring the world, he must increase his power to the level of a magister, and he must also constantly train his physical state to stay in shape. And lastly, he must also learn offensive magical spells. Once the tasks are assigned, Leolun explains that the protagonist shouldn't really be worried about offensive magical spells. It's relative at first. As long as his body is strengthened, he should be satisfied. Now, the protagonist starts to feel relaxed, but he didn't expect his teacher to come up with a new task. And this one was really difficult, as described by him. Leolun tasks him with finding a legendary artifact, more precisely, a divine sword that had been used by the creator gods. Y pauses for a moment to think and then ends up asking if the artifact really exists, or if it's just a legend. The old man firmly responds that it does indeed exist, and even mentions that he knows the approximate location. However, the success percentage of actually finding the divine sword purely and exclusively depends on his luck. He also adds that finding that weapon is the key to becoming a true Grand Master. Y then smiles excitedly as he enjoys challenges and promises to find it. The old man now tells the boy that after the first 30 days pass, he will accompany him back home to explain the situation to his parents. After this, he will be in a position to start his training, which means exploring the outside world and searching for the divine sword of the creator gods. Before concluding the conversation, he warns Y that the time he estimates it will take to complete the task will be approximately 2 years. To make matters more challenging, in the event that he returns and hasn't been able to complete his tasks, he must keep trying until he achieves it. The next day in the open-air corridors of the academy, we find Michael. He's somewhat furious with Leolun and reproaches the protagonist, saying that his teacher's decision is truly a shame, considering he has a high level of magic, to ask him to undertake that journey to the outside world. Y tells him not to worry and explains all the details in depth, trying to make his friend understand that the path his teacher suggests he follows is better than the one he's been on so far. Michael doesn't have a chance to respond with his opinion about Y's and his teacher's plan, as his friend anticipates him by asking a question he didn't expect at all. Y asks if he wants to undertake the exploration of the outside world and the search for the lost object together with him. Michael becomes a bit small and somewhat discouraged because he can't give a definitive and immediate yes to the protagonist. This kind of decision can't be made on his own. he must first consult with his mother and father at home to let them know and grant him permission. So, he promises his friend that he will give him a definite answer tomorrow. Y also becomes a bit discouraged as there's a chance now that Michael might not be able to accompany him. The next morning, Michael arrives very early at the academy. Y, who had been there for some time before him, greets him eagerly to hear his response. Unfortunately, the red-haired boy must tell him that he won't be able to be his companion on the journey. Y is greatly surprised by this, and Michael explains that his family hasn't given him permission. The protagonist insists that they could solve it together, but his friend says again that it won't be possible, as the reason is a private matter within his family, so there's no way to change it. Then Y starts to feel completely disappointed and tells him that he would have really loved for him to be his partner. Michael falls silent. The protagonist now encourages him to at least study at the Royal Academy of Advanced Magic. After making the recommendation, Y confesses that he'll be gone for 2 years before they can see each other again. Suddenly, Michael jumps up, wraps his arms around him, and hugs him tightly, shouting "boss," as he always used to call him, expressing his affection and appreciation for Y, who hasn't left yet and already seems to be missed. Y couldn't deny that he felt sad about his friend's family decision, but still decided to offer words of support to Michael, saying that even though they can't be together temporarily, they will always be great friends. His friend responds that he deeply regrets his family's decision and that his real wish was to go with him, but he can't disobey family rules. He tells Y that his family group is very large and he has to work hard for all of them. Y fully understands and asks him not to say any more words. Michael is like a brother to him, so he completely understands. Now we have a jump in time of exactly 1 month, where the moment of separation has finally arrived. Y walks with his head down, accompanied by his teacher, as they pass through the welcome arch of the academy where he had spent his last years. Before he gets far enough to not see it anymore, he stops and turns to look at it with nostalgia. Leolun notices that his apprentice is feeling sad and tries to console him, telling him not to worry because it's just a matter of time until he can return there. When that moment comes, he will do it with glory and be a pride for the academy and for him. But Y still couldn't shake off his sadness, so Leolun decides to perform one more trick to surprise the protagonist and distract him from that terrible feeling he was experiencing. He asks the boy if he wants to see the sky. This seems to pique Y's interest, and he asks the old man how it would be possible to go to the sky. Leolun proudly tells the boy that apparently he had forgotten that his master's secondary magic was wind magic, and thanks to it, he could perform a very peculiar technique called the wind carriage. When the old man uses this technique, his feet start to lift off the ground, and his body slowly rises in the air, beginning to levitate. Y instantly forgets what he was feeling and widens his eyes in surprise at seeing his teacher fly. Leolun extends his hand, inviting him to take a ride through the skies. A moment later, the protagonist finds himself behind Leolun, soaring through the sky. Both stand on a flying cloud, moving at a moderate speed. Y curiously asks his teacher when he will be able to fly on his own like he does. The old man responds that he'll be able to do so only when he learns first-class martial skills. The flight of our characters lasts for an hour, and at the end, they stop to rest on a hill. After this, they set off for the protagonist's hometown to have the necessary conversation with his parents about his future. Once at Y's house, Leolun explains in detail to the protagonist's parents all the plans he has for their son in the coming year. After an extensive but satisfying conversation, they accept their son's fate and the mission assigned by his teacher. Night falls, and Leolun walks alongside Y through a forest. The teacher explains that this time what he's entrusting to him is truly difficult to achieve, so he's brought some items as gifts. He extends his hand, revealing 3 small objects that appeared golden from the outside, adorned with dragon designs. The protagonist looks without understanding what he's seeing and decides to ask his teacher what those objects are. Leolun explains that those objects are magical scrolls used for escape. These scrolls have the property of teleporting the user exactly 50 kilometers away, but to a random location it's not possible to choose. That's why they are valuable items, and the protagonist must take good care of them. Y happily thanks for the gift, and as he was about to say something more, Leolun interrupts him with another gift. It's a booklet that explains the method for using a magic barrier. Turns out the old man had asked the best magic master on the continent to create a magic circle for the boy. This circle could be used for teleportation wherever he is when he encounters a riddle or a mission he can't complete. By using this circle, Y would be directly teleported back to the school. Finally, the old man adds that if he ever plans to use the magic barrier, he must be in his best physical and mental condition. Otherwise, during teleportation, deviations could occur that wouldn't allow him to reach the original destination. Y fully understands and promises to practice before using that magic barrier. Leolun now makes a revelation that might capture the protagonist's attention the most, or at least be the most satisfying for his ears. His master had left him 1,000 diamond coins inside his amethyst card. After hearing this, Y's eyes light up with excitement. Now he must listen to the final part of his master's speech, the truly most important one. The master tells him that the artifact he'll be going after is located approximately in the Kan province, within the Dalu kingdom. Here, he needs to find a specific valley. Y nods, still happy, remembering the amount of money waiting for him, and says he promises to remember the location his master had just provided. As Leolun is about to leave the scene, wrapping up the conversation, he remembers to ask the boy a question. He wants to know where the dagger that his friend Michael had given him recently is. Y reaches for his waist and draws the weapon his friend had handed him. The protagonist's demeanor had drastically changed upon remembering that his best friend couldn't accompany him on this journey. Now, gripping it by the handle, he shows his master the firearm he possesses. The dagger's blade is reddish, and the handle is golden, a luxurious sight to behold, aside from its powers. Leolundai observes it and, with his wisdom, informs Y that compared to imperial weapons, it might not be a big deal. But still, it's very powerful as it can pierce through all magical and martial defenses. Therefore, Y must exercise utmost caution when using that dagger. Y gazes at the weapon and feels happy, as his friend had given him an extremely important and powerful item to carry out his journey. Michael was a great friend. The next day, with the sun shining in the sky, Y stands before his master, his mother, and his father. It's time to bid farewell to the three of them and embark on this new adventure. Before parting, his mother, a bit worried, tells him to be careful. On the other hand, his father tells him not to disappoint them by failing his mission. Finally, his master reminds him that he has the escape magic he gave him to use in emergencies. Y turns and watches the trio of people as he slowly walks away down the path. As he walks through the forest, the protagonist contemplates his next objectives. The first thing he needs to do is head to the Zayuda Kingdom to meet Professor Qin. This person is a close friend of his master's and also the Dean of the Academy of Riders. Once he arrives in this kingdom, he will undergo training under this individual. When he successfully completes it, he will continue on his journey to find the lost artifact and fulfill his main mission. After walking for a good while, Y takes out a map from his backpack to orient himself and confirms that he should be close to Lake Xining. Once he finds it and crosses it, he'll be near the border of Zayuda. Y looks up from the map and sees that he's approaching a passage his master had described as very beautiful. So, he hurries to cross it and enjoy the landscape. And indeed, it was. Lake Xining was truly admirable, with multicolored fish swimming in it, pretty insects crawling on the plants around, and in the clear and transparent water of the lake, he could even see his own reflection. The protagonist lies down on the ground facing the radiant sun that bathes the area, and takes off his shoes to dip his feet in the water. At times, he thought this was paradise, and he had the desire to stay in this place indefinitely. But a sound he didn't like at all interrupts the peace and relaxation he was enjoying to the fullest. Y sits up and remains seated on the edge of the lake while he looks in the direction from which the noises were coming. Figures start to take shape in the distance, maybe about 7 of them, all dressed the same. They wore black robes with matching hoods and some kind of mask covering their mouths and noses. From their silhouette, the protagonist deduces that it's a group of women, and he's not mistaken. As they come closer, he realizes that one of them is the leader, and the rest are escorting her, highlighting her importance. Facing the group of women, he can barely notice that their leader has pink hair, just like her eyes. But he doesn't have more time to analyze the scenario or the leader because one of her escorts asks him what he's looking at and threatens to gouge out his eyes if his gaze persists. Y understands he's facing a troublesome woman and thinks that it's best to find a way to deal with her without violence. So, he comes up with no better plan than pretending to have a cramp in his right foot. The pink-haired woman's henchwoman is surprised by the silly thing the boy just did, but still, she doesn't abandon her intentions and tells him that she'll kill him anyway. But now, the leader of the women's group comes into action, calling her companion by her name, Ling, and asking her not to cause trouble. After this, and when her henchwoman's attention shifts to her, she reminds her of the advice her father gave them before embarking on their journey. Ling tries to say something but is left speechless. Meanwhile, the protagonist is both surprised and enchanted by the leader's tone of voice. He finds it extremely sweet and pleasant, comparing it to the morning breeze of spring passing through his ears. But his trance is broken when Ling shouts at him to leave the place, and that they will spare his life this time. Y doesn't seem to care at all, and his response is to lie back, supporting his back on the grass again, with his hands behind his head and his eyes closed. Then, the protagonist states that he won't go anywhere since this isn't their home, and he can do what he wants. This response annoys the girls, and their leader ends up asking Ling to punish him, give him a lesson, but not to kill him. Far from being worried, Y closes his eyes and smiles, enjoying the sound of the leader's voice, eager to hear more from her. But upon opening his eyes, he is surprised to see that Ling is launching an attack against him, aiming to cut him with the saber she holds in her hands. Our agile protagonist jumps to the side, dodging the girl's attack, watching as the saber she wielded splits a rock in half on the ground, demonstrating the sharpness of the weapon and the woman's strength. Now at a distance, he complains about Ling, calling her crazy and saying she could have killed him with that attack. A few meters behind where this combat is taking place, one of the henchwomen, the one with brown hair, shares her opinion with the pink-haired leader, whom she calls Princess, and tells her that the young boy is a magician. Y admits that he was lucky to teleport in time to dodge Ling's sword attack, which had cut a few strands of hair from his head with her saber. This maneuver also astonished the group of girls, who now recognized that the young man was a magician and, like all magicians, was audacious. Insults didn't bother the protagonist since he himself accepted that all magicians were audacious. But if there was something that irritated him a lot, it was speaking ill of his friends and family, and even worse, speaking ill of his teacher, especially knowing that each and every one of them were excellent magicians. Thus, this only led him to feel compelled to teach the group of hooded girls a lesson. Y summons the light spirits of the light and asks them to transform into sharp arrows. One of the girls in the group, who hadn't revealed her identity yet, and was still wearing her mask to hide her face, seemed worried because the young man was using offensive light magic. On the other hand, the pink-haired leader remarks that this move reminded her of something. But it wasn't the time to dwell on that, as the protagonist had just shot an arrow larger than himself, and it was approaching the female group. Then she performs an upward movement, cutting and dispelling the attack, leaving no trace, as if no arrow had ever been launched. Afterward, she fixes her gaze on the boy and angrily calls him a brat and insolent. What surprised Y immensely was that he realized the princess had used her innate martial kai to reinforce her defensive movement and undo his attack in a matter of seconds and effectively. He was also astounded as he believed such a thing didn't exist. He had only heard of it, and now he was witnessing it firsthand. Now the leader of the girls' group adopts an offensive stance, holding her saber and ready to attack the boy. But Y won't be intimidated by anything, and with even greater speed and determination than his rival, he decides to conjure a new light spell. The young man implores his light spirits to appear and gather around him, forming the holy light. They obey, enclosing Y in a radiant circle and making him levitate in the air as a sign of protection. This leaves the princess astonished, no longer doubting what she doubted moments ago. This young man truly was a light magician. As the protagonist hangs suspended in the air, defending against the attacks of the girls, he is surprised to see one of them fall to her knees on the ground, as if in pain from an attack she received. Y wonders why this happened since his light spell was of a defensive style, and there was no way it could harm anyone. As the girl kneels, she looks at the protagonist and tells him that what's happening isn't normal, as she could have fought him for 300 consecutive rounds. However, something seems to be affecting her, and she can't get up. Y remains confused about what's happening, but his attention shifts to the princess and leader of the group, who has just recited an incantation in a language he doesn't recognize and therefore can't understand. Seconds after she finishes her words, a ball of darkness twice the size of her hand appears floating above her. Without hesitation, the princess hurls it toward one of her companions, the same one who was kneeling due to her inability to withstand the light from Y's defensive spell. The ball hits her back, leaving her rigid in place. Y completely disregards the danger he's exposing himself to and, far from worrying, decides to ask the princess what kind of magic she used, as he's never seen it before. To top off his question, he accidentally addresses her as sister, something that doesn't sit well with the pink-haired girl, and prompts her to retaliate immediately. Ignoring the protagonist's question, she turns her back and orders her followers not to let him escape. This surprises Y, who expected a bit more friendliness from the princess, who then instructs the other girls to silence him. Y opens his eyes wide and worries about the leader's decision, immediately telling her that there's no need to treat him like that and that she shouldn't go as far as ordering him to be killed, as it only reflects her ruthlessness. However, as the princess withdraws from the scene, she merely responds with a cold yes, implying that she believes she's acting appropriately. Now the 8 companions launch themselves at our protagonist, seeking to fulfill the objective their leader assigned them. To defend himself, Y reinforces his light barrier, as he watches closely the movements of his attackers, who so far are unable to breach the force field surrounding him. However, something is beginning to worry him. The princess's subjects recite certain words in their unique language, which conjures a thick black mist onto the battlefield, intensifying with each passing second. Moments later, this strange mist has covered nearly the entire defensive light sphere protecting our protagonist. Y understands that these girls aren't playing around and will do anything to accomplish their mission. Resigning the idea that his holy light won't be able to dispel the mist, he closes his eyes and thinks of a new strategy to get out of this predicament. Y abandons levitation and plants his feet on the ground. Instead of seeking help from the small light spirits, he focuses all his magical energy and implores the aid of the greater light spirits, asking them to please allow him to harness their formidable power. It seems the light spirits are listening, and they're granting him their power to defend himself in this situation. A sound resembling a crack is heard from the direction where the light barrier protected the protagonist. Had it broken? At least, that's what one of the henchwomen thought, seemingly ready to claim victory. Even from a distance, the princess and leader of the group, who was attentively observing the whole scene, knew that what was happening was far from good. An immense flash of light emanates from the direction of the protagonist, the magical power of his ancestors illuminating and shielding him from the darkness conjured by the girls. Following this, Y's voice cries out, "May the infinite light illuminate the earth," as his figure extends his hand, pointing straight into the darkness. To conclude the act, Y spreads his legs and arms, forming a human star shape, and with the shout of "Illuminate," he generates an expanding burst of light that eradicates all the surrounding darkness and the adjacent blackened terrain. The princess, watching from a distance, closely follows the young man's maneuver and the reaction of her companions. She conjures 8 purple balls, each of which returns to her companions, protecting them from the light explosion of the mage. An explosion occurs upon the collision of the light against the dark force fields of the girls, leaving all of them with momentary blindness. Y seizes the opportunity to flee the area, running as fast as he can. Being a light mage gives him the advantage of controlling the direction and intensity of his powers. What he did this time was simply generate an attack to distract and minimally injure his adversaries, buying himself a little time to finally escape the turmoil. As he runs in the opposite direction of the group of girls who are on their knees, rubbing their eyes in an attempt to regain their sight, the princess appears by his side. Apparently, she wasn't affected by his blindness strategy. Her gaze is fixed on him, displaying annoyance at how challenging he's making things for her. However, our protagonist isn't thinking about that. His thoughts are solely occupied with admiration for the beauty of the princess. She had lost her mask in the explosion, revealing her face. Y softly comments that he has never seen a girl as beautiful as her, but she doesn't respond to the compliment. In fact, she appears concerned, as she touches her face and realizes that her mouth and nose are uncovered, and the young man now knows her face. This worries her more than the power of the light mage. A prolonged gaze exchange that initially seemed never-ending was taking place between the protagonist and the princess. They were both staring at each other intently, but with different intentions. The girl breaks the silence. Although blushing due to Y's words, she decides to shout and call for her teacher to help her get rid of the pervert who had, on more than one occasion, complimented her on her beauty. Y didn't feel guilty at all for what he had said. In fact, he was rather confused. He had intended to praise the girl, but she only wanted to get rid of him, even going to the extent of ending his life. However, as the protagonist appeared not to take the situation seriously, it further fueled the princess's anger. She asked him if his outward beauty was all there was to him. How could someone who sounded as sweet as her on the inside be capable of wanting to take the life of a guy like him? But Y senses that the atmosphere is growing tense. For perhaps a fraction of a second, the sky darkens, and something descends from it at great speed until it stands face to face with him. Then, the daylight returns to control the scene. The figure the princess referred to as Professor manifests itself in front of Y. This complex to describe being wore a black suit like the group of women, with the difference that something resembling wings, currently folded, extended from its shoulders down to below its waist. The being also had a white mask with a long, pointed nose like beak and red eyes. The black hood that crowned it was drawn back, and on it, one could see a kind of magnified eye symbol. This same symbol was also present on the wings of this figure. Lastly, a long black saber protruded from its back. Y barely had time to process all the details of this figure when he could barely pay attention. The voice of the princess was heard. She was asking the professor to help her eliminate the boy, as he not only knew her secret but had also had the opportunity to see her without the mask that protected her identity. So, her final request was for him to kill him or at least assist her in doing so. Y smiles, dismissing the situation, and to further test his rival's patience, he tells her that she's a real beauty, and what she has in beauty, she also has in fierceness. But he liked what he saw, so now, changing his attitude to that of a smitten child, he proposes to be her friend. The princess responds to the boy's words by merely bowing her head and remaining silent. Afterward, the figure that had just appeared in her defense, her professor, is the one who takes the path of violence. With a simple motion, the professor generates several gusts of wind that push back the protagonist. Y had to invoke a defensive light spell to shield himself from them. Following this, he realizes that the presence of the professor was undeniably powerful. The professor opens his mouth for the first time to belittle our protagonist, telling him that he's simply a child with light magic powers. With these words, he undermines him as if being a light mage were something derogatory. Y reacts angrily, just as the professor expected, and retorts that he is completely ignorant of the great popularity that the element of light had gained in recent times. Afterward, he humorously tells the professor that among all the mages on the continent, he was the weakest of them all. The protagonist's adversary seems surprised by the revelation the boy had just made, as the information they possessed was not the same as what the young man was providing. Here, we pause to take into account the protagonist's reflection, where he says that he didn't imagine that thanks to this conversation, humanity would be saved from a disaster. Returning to the battlefield, Y reaffirms to the professor that his words are true, and the man becomes interested in what he's saying. But the princess is not comfortable with this conversation. She starts to get annoyed that they are just talking and nothing is happening. So, she shouts at the top of her lungs to the professor to stop listening to the nonsense the boy had to say, and to finally kill him, as she couldn't allow the young man to reveal her secrets. Y addresses the princess, asking even though he knows the answer, if she still insists that the professor takes his life. Immediately after, he calls her beauty again and tells her that girls with her status shouldn't behave like that. He adds that he will make sure not to choose a beautiful girl as his wife in the near future. Finally, the professor gives in to the pink-haired girl's screams and informs Y that he will proceed to kill him and later verify if the information he had just given him was indeed true. So, without further ado, he distances himself from Y, raises his arms on either side of his body, ready to cast the spell, but not before summoning the great god of darkness, to whom he offers his soul in exchange for becoming an infinite devourer. Y is surprised by what he sees. It turns out he's facing a clan of demons, and that's not at all good. So, he stops joking and being careless. When he sees a giant shadow pouncing on him and opening its mouth to swallow him, he summons a defensive light sphere around his body to keep it at bay while he contemplates his next attack. Y comes up with the idea of concentrating a magical light attack in the sphere that covers him and launching it against the shadow. As he does so, he's surprised to see that the darkness is effortlessly consuming his energy ball, leaving him defenseless once again. The protagonist feels completely surprised by how strong the demon clan's professor is. Next, he starts to reflect that until that moment he hadn't come across any kind of enemy like this, so he had no measure of how to interact with them, how to defend himself, or how to behave. The boy was well aware that demons held a deep resentment towards the human race, and apparently, for the time being at least, the best thing he could do was to flee the area until he became better prepared to deal with dark magic. Y places his index finger on his forehead where a third eye had been glowing intensely since the battle began. He then uses his short-range teleportation escape ability. With this, his body dematerializes, evading the professor, who is left alone on the battlefield dealing with Y's light ball. Just moments after the protagonist disappears, the darkness ball finally engulfs the light ball that Y had launched earlier. Now the professor has the freedom to focus his attacks on the protagonist, but he chooses not to, not even to attempt it. He assumes that the young mage is very powerful for his age, and he's also surprised that the boy can use spatial magic with such ease. That might make it difficult for him to be caught easily. Once this reflection is over, the professor turns around and approaches the princess. The lady asks him why he couldn't handle the boy and let him escape. The professor ignores the question and responds that what's truly important is the alarming information the young boy just gave them, specifically that the magical element of light is becoming a trend among students on the continent. This way, the demon clan would be in danger. This news leaves the princess speechless. She doesn't have time to respond as the professor turns and walks away slowly. As he departs, he tells the girl that the protagonist's magic is something he's never seen before. They were clearly facing a person with great power, and it's also evident that this person hadn't used 100% of their power, which meant danger. He adds that, at this moment, he doesn't think the boy is at his level, but as he grows and develops his skills further, he will surpass him by far. Moreover, now that they are a demon clan planning to infiltrate among humans, the professor says that the best course of action for them would be to postpone their plans of attack and invasion on humanity. Finally, he explains to the princess that they should gather updated information about how the humans are preparing so that their plan remains flawless. The princess nods and accepts the updated terms of the ongoing mission. She asks the professor if he's still thinking about traveling to the kingdom of Axia. He responds affirmatively, but she and her group must arrive first and settle in, while he will personally return to his country and inform His Majesty about what has transpired, so that a decision on how to proceed with the mission can be made. The girl accepts what her powerful companion tells her and responds that she will set out immediately. A few meters away from where the protagonist and the demon professor had measured their powers, we can see why lost in thought as he continues to teleport to get as far away from his enemies as possible. In his thoughts, there are no longer nerves and uncertainty about who that professor was. Instead, he thinks about the princess, her beauty and her personality. He promises himself that when the time comes to choose a girl, he will leave the most beautiful ones aside and only observe them, as apparently they were the troublemakers. After a while of escaping, Y arrives at a village at night. He begins knocking on the doors of the neighbors, hoping that someone will let him in and allow him to spend the night in their home. Apparently, everyone refuses, but eventually, an elderly person decides to open the door and invites him in. Once inside the man's home, the protagonist approaches the table where a moment later the elderly man would serve him food. Y devours it like a desperate person, and despite his host indicating that he doesn't have much more to offer, he gratefully tells him that it tastes delicious and that he often eats the same food at his own home. The man now sits next to him and starts a conversation with his guest. He tells him that he's heard that he's traveling to the kingdom of Ziyuda, but he feels obliged to inform him that in recent times, it hasn't been as peaceful a realm as it used to be. This is because there's a group of thieves on the country's border disrupting public order, and this problem doesn't seem to be getting resolved anytime soon. After listening to the problem at the border, Y becomes a bit concerned but doesn't dwell on it. Instead, he asks the man if there's any other way to reach the kingdom or if it's impossible. The elderly man responds affirmatively, saying that yes, there is a path through the border city of Pulama that he could take to reach his destination. Y gives his approval to this suggestion and comments that he will follow that path. Finally, the man suggests that the best and safest option would be to hire a group of mercenaries to escort him during his journey. The protagonist responds to this comically, saying that he might as well apply as a mercenary himself to earn some extra money. After dinner, the protagonist tells us that his host mentioned a nearby river. He heads there to take a moonlit bath. Upon arriving, he immerses himself in the clear waters with a single thought in his mind: the pink-haired girl, the princess. His reflection appears in the water, shouting, "I will kill you." This doesn't sit well with Y, who feels disappointed by her as she is a very beautiful girl, and he would have preferred her to be a kind person, perhaps even someone to consider as a future wife. He can't get that beautiful face out of his thoughts. The next day, our protagonist walks the lively streets of the border city of Pulama. While wandering around, impressed by the city's beauty, he asks people how to get to the mercenary guild. A kind man helps him, providing the precise information he needs to find the building. Following the directions, our protagonist arrives at the building that serves as the headquarters of the Mercenaries Union. He recognizes it thanks to its well-known logo, which is a sword piercing a shield. Without hesitation, he enters the building. Once inside, he heads straight to the main hall, where he finds a crowd of people wanting to join this society. Among these individuals, what catches his attention the most are the dwarf elves, as he hadn't seen any of them in his life before. Having familiarized himself with the place and feeling eager to register as a mercenary, he approaches a human woman who works as a secretary there. She's a bit nervous since her workday is ending and she has a date to attend. Her nerves temporarily fade as the boy interrupts her, asking how he can start receiving mercenary tasks. She responds that to begin, he should fill out a form that is a few meters away from him and points in the direction he should go. After that, he can start receiving missions. Now Y is filling out the form that the Mercenary Guild's employee had indicated to him. This woman is a bit annoyed by the situation and complains about people like Y who arrive at the building asking how to become a mercenary without even knowing their own limits. Y is very focused and successfully completes the form. He turns around to return to the secretary. Upon reaching her desk, he slides the document with his information gently and confidently. Now the woman begins to read Y's provided information carefully. However, her expression drastically changes when she reaches the rank section, where the boy had written Archmage. The woman is left perplexed but with some doubts. She didn't want to be deceived right away, so she decides to ask our protagonist if the rank he was reporting is indeed correct, as she believed it might be a joke. Y answers without hesitation, firmly confirming that it is correct, and he asks why she doubts his words. The woman now tells him that if his words are true, he should have certification from the Association of Mages. But this isn't a problem for our protagonist either. He places a folded paper on the table and hands it to the skeptical woman. She takes it and reads it carefully to verify its authenticity. The paper reads, Zhang Gong, graduate of the Royal Intermediate Magic Academy. However, what truly impresses and leaves the woman speechless is the part where it's mentioned that the class leader exempted the student from all magical exams due to outstanding grades. Now, the secretary can't help but shout loudly, causing a commotion in the entire room, saying that he's a great magician graduated from the Royal Intermediate Magic Academy. Some people around them turn interestedly upon hearing the woman's exclamation. Meanwhile, Y covers his ears, saying that she will make him deaf. Once the commotion settles down and under the admiring gaze of the woman, the protagonist asks if, after all, he can or cannot become a mercenary. The woman responds positively, saying there's no problem at all. She even confirms that thanks to his rank, not only can he take on mercenary missions, but he will automatically be considered a grade C mercenary. This means he can choose missions to his liking, as long as he believes he can complete them. Y is left astonished and highly interested in what the woman is saying, not because he would be a grade C mercenary with privileges, but because he wants to know all the available grades within that guild. So, he asks her for a brief explanation to better understand. With a smile, the woman gladly explains that mercenaries are divided into S, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G ranks. Each class has its own missions distributed according to the appropriate level of difficulty for each rank. However, mercenaries can move up in rank by completing a certain number of missions. Y appreciates the explanation and then asks the woman what mission he would like to receive. The protagonist replies that the difficulty level of the mission doesn't matter. What he currently prioritizes is the geographical area. Thus, he asks if there's any mission available that is close to the kingdom of Ziyuda. The secretary nods, indicating that she understands his request, and tells him to wait a moment while she starts searching for a mission that suits his needs. As the woman walks away, Y stands observing the room and its surroundings. Suddenly, something captures his attention strongly, and he fixes his gaze on one of the walls. There, he finds a drawing of a very unconventional sword alongside some inscriptions. As he approaches, he realizes that it's the mission entrusted to him by his master, Leolon. However, what truly surprises him is that the mission's indicated difficulty level is SSS, the most complex of all difficulty levels. He also notices an additional reward for completing the mission, 1 million diamonds, an amount he believes could cover his national tax expenses for an entire calendar year. After analyzing the mission, he wonders who would be the one to pay that amount of money. The secretary of the mercenaries building, who has just returned, feels a bit embarrassed by the boy's curiosity and innocence. She asks him to follow her as she has found a suitable mission for him. Y follows her, and upon arriving, he learns that the assignment he's been given is a grade B mission. He approaches slowly to read what he's been assigned. The mission consists of escorting a group of businessmen on their journey. This group of important individuals is heading precisely where the protagonist needs to go, the capital of Ziyuda within the kingdom of Ziyuda. This task offers a payment of 300 diamonds. However, as a recommendation from the woman, she warns the protagonist that missions of this rank are often performed in groups alongside other mercenaries. Seeing that the boy has no intention of recruiting someone else to accompany him, she directly asks him if he thinks he'll be fine on his own. Now Y turns towards the room and shouts, asking if anyone present would like to form a group of mercenaries to complete this mission. At first, silence reigns in the room, but after a moment, a man approaches Y. He's dressed in a tight black outfit, with 2 swords at his waist and another crossed on his back. This person tells our protagonist that he can join him, as he has the desire to undertake the same mission. Y feels happy hearing this, as he has found travel companions, making the journey much safer than doing it alone. Thus, the boy asks him directly if he is a mercenary. The slender man affirms that he is indeed a mercenary, and not only that but also a member of a fully recognized group called the Fierce Dragons. Y, intrigued, asks the man from the Fierce Dragons clan how many people are in their group. The man replies that there are approximately 20 martial arts practitioners, all from the kingdom of Ziyuda and eager to undertake the mission. The protagonist also curiously asks about the man's warrior level, and inquires about the rest of the group. The man responds that his current level is almost knight, and the rest of the group ranges from intermediate to advanced warrior levels. Once Y gets all the information he wanted, he informs them that he feels like joining the Fierce Dragons group, but before that, he has 3 conditions they must accept. Intrigued, the one who invited him to the group asks what those conditions are. So, the protagonist starts with his short list of conditions. Firstly, he requests that they please prepare a carriage for his transportation, as he is a magician and his physical strength isn't sufficient for the entire journey on foot. The second condition is to make it clear that neither he nor the Fierce Dragons group will be part of each other's team. Everyone will be allies, indicating that he won't take orders from any of them. He adds that he knows when and how to act. When danger approaches the group, he will take the initiative without hesitation. His third and final condition is perhaps the one the man liked the least. Y asks for 10% of the diamond reward upon completing the mission. With the young man's conditions established and accepted by the most powerful warrior of the Fierce Dragons, they agree to meet later and depart together. They notify the secretary that they accept the mission and that it's time to leave to prepare. Y decides it's time to head to a good restaurant to fill his belly before embarking on this long and risky journey. He enters a high-end restaurant and fills his stomach with healthy food. He had forgotten the taste and nutrients of such meals as he had been eating dried foods and forest finds recently, such as some fruits. When Y finishes his meal, the waiter brings the bill. Y unintentionally asks if he can pay with a special type of card and then presents the amethyst card, which emits a brilliant violet color around its black base. The waiter's eyes widen upon seeing the payment method his customer wants to use, and he asks for a moment to consult with his boss if they can accept the card. The waiter loudly calls for his boss and informs him that the customer wants to pay with an amethyst card. Rapid footsteps draw near the table where our protagonist had eaten. A small, chubby man with a greedy attitude rushes to the spot after hearing the news from his employee. The middle-aged man greets the boy and asks if he is the one who wants to pay with the amethyst card. Y confirms and explains that he's in a bit of a hurry as he wants to sleep after filling his stomach. However, the restaurant owner doesn't let him leave just yet. He has one more question to ask him, which is about his occupation. The protagonist is a bit puzzled by the question, as he doesn't see its relevance. Nevertheless, he answers that he is a magician. Now, he has a question of his own. What does his occupation have to do with the food and payment? The restaurant owner feels proud of the young man's question and proceeds to explain the situation. The restaurant Y visited is known for hosting diners of high social status or those with exceptional skills. If these guests provide a positive review of the establishment, they can get a free meal. Y decides he'll write a review since he finds the idea appealing. The restaurant owner asks about his mage rank, and the protagonist responds that he's a Grand Mage. This surprises the man, and he tells Y that his rank is sufficient to receive the review. He thanks him in advance and lets him know that he'll be waiting. Y leaves the place, realizing that by simply writing a few basic words praising the restaurant's cuisine, he could eat as much free food as he wanted. Busy. The day goes by, and the long-awaited review letter from the mage finally arrives at the restaurant. The waiter who had served him and the building owner receive the envelope with delight, and extend their gratitude to the boy. Later on, the words written in the envelope would boost the restaurant's economy. The words from the young man, many generations later, would be auctioned for the modest sum of 20,000 diamonds. Now, we head to the Eastern Gate, where our protagonist should reunite with the Fierce Dragons group to start the mission they selected together. Y greets everyone, eager to begin the journey. However, before setting off, the same man he spoke to in the mercenaries building introduces him to the caravan leader, whom they'll be escorting to Ziyuda. The elderly man appears hunchbacked, hidden beneath a robe. His name is Lu Meng. After sharing all this information, the man realizes he hadn't introduced himself to our protagonist yet. So, he agrees to provide his name and surname, Longmeng Hai. The protagonist must introduce himself as well, as he hadn't done so up until that moment. He He does it just as Long Meng had, stating his first and last name. So, waving to Lu Meng, he tells him it's an honor to accompany him on this journey. Lu Meng asks the young man if he's the Grand Mage who is starting to be talked about more and more. However, the question from the caravan leader seems to displease our protagonist, and he decides they need to provide a little demonstration of his magic to make the elderly man believe in his words. Y steps back a bit and then concentrates. He asks the spirits of light to gather before him. After a few seconds, the young man levitates a few centimeters off the ground, and an intense ball of light forms around him. Then, with great brilliance and accumulated power, he detonates that energy, transforming it into a burst of light that blinds everyone present for a brief moment. Once the disorienting effect subsides, Y appears before the witnesses of his ability. In a proud manner, he states that if they have even a bit of knowledge about light magic, they should be able to distinguish that the defensive ability he just used was at level 6. More than one of the onlookers are astonished by Y's brief and simple demonstration, but those who approach him to apologize for doubting his power are Lu Meng and Long Meng. Both of them ask him to please take his time to rest and regain his strength, as they believe it will be necessary for the journey. They also tell him that if he wishes, they will follow his orders for the duration of the mission. However, Y is humble and replies that he doesn't need to be treated like a leader or have his orders followed. He confesses that his display of power was only to make them believe he's a Grand Mage and not just joining the mission for the reward. He adds that Long Meng should be the one to lead the group since he's better at commanding a team of people. The mission begins, and the journey to Ziyuda commences as well. While scavenger birds accompany the caravan in the hopes of feeding on any bodies that can't endure the journey, Y is comfortably reclined in his carriage. He feels happy and relaxed, as everyone has gained great respect for him after his display of power. They treat him in a special way. For instance, he's been given the best carriage, and when it's time to eat, the freshest and most delicious fruits are also given to him. Now, Y closes his eyes and leans back, hoping to doze off for a while, thinking that when he decides to return, he'll have an excellent restaurant with free, satisfying food waiting for him. However, Y's rest is interrupted by Long Meng, who bursts into his carriage and climbs over his body to shake him awake by his shoulders. The leader of the fierce dragons alerts him that a large group of bandits is outside, ready to rob them of their belongings, regardless of how dangerous it might be considering the powerful team escorting Lu Meng. Leaving his comfort zone, our lazy protagonist sees that the path they were following is obstructed by armed men with a violent and angry attitude, clearly looking for a fight. Y starts to feel disappointed, as he had expected the selected mission to be much calmer than it appeared at that moment. He was feeling extremely unlucky, but this feeling worsens when Long Meng informs him that the number of bandits in the group they were about to face exceeds 300 men. One of the bandits, the one with a mustache, approaches with a smile and a triumphant air towards where the protagonist, the caravan leader, and the leader of the fierce dragons were located. The bandit says that his group wanted to speak with the leader. Y turns with the intention of pointing to Lu Meng, but Long Meng beats him to it and pushes him forward, making him act as the leader to handle the situation. Y, a bit frightened since numbers wouldn't be on their side in this confrontation, timidly asks the group of bandits what they wanted. Suddenly, a figure makes its way through the crowd and steps forward to face the young mage. It was the leader of the bandits, dressed in heavy black armor that set him apart from the rest of the wrongdoers. He was the leader of the bandits. Without beating around the bush, he informs the mage that he could spare their lives if they left all their valuable belongings aside and went on their way. Y decides to address the leader of the bandits respectfully and tries to reach an agreement through words. He asks if there might be a chance that they could be let go this time, and mentions that times were tough for everyone, implying that robbery wasn't the best option. The bandit leader responds that they had been waiting for a whole month for a well-laden group with merchandise, food, and money. So, the definitive answer was that they would let them go, but perhaps only in their dreams. After this response, the protagonist begins to believe that there's no way to change their minds, so he plays his last card, remembering that his professor had informed him that the people of Ziyuda were extremely proud. Maybe he could make something good come out of it. The young mage slowly approaches the bandit leader and asks if he was a knight. The leader, a bit annoyed, affirms it but also tells him he shouldn't meddle in things that don't concern him. He even confesses that their top leader is known as the Sky Knight. Now Y has cleverly devised a plan. He asks this knight if he's up for a wager. The knight observes him thoughtfully for a moment, intrigued by the proposal, and asks what that wager would be. Y adopts a more serious posture and replies that the wager would be between the two of them, with no one else allowed to interfere. The challenge is that the knight wouldn't be able to defeat him. Upon hearing this, the group of bandits bursts into laughter, completely confident in their leader's power and underestimating the young mage. The knight informs our protagonist that he accepts the challenge but adds that if he wins, he will not only take all their valuables but also their lives. He then asks if he still agrees to carry out that wager. Y hesitates for a moment and thinks that it's not at all convenient for the lives of the entire caravan to depend on him. He's about to decline his rival's counter-proposal, but just then, he's interrupted by Long Meng, who tells him that everyone had complete faith in his great magical powers and abilities. Therefore, they also entrusted their lives to him and believed that they could leave them in his hands. Y doesn't accept what this man is saying and asks his rival for a moment to reflect on this challenge. But Long Meng tries to persuade him to accept the rival's counter-challenge. The protagonist's indecision is interrupted by Lu Sai Meng, the caravan leader. It turns out that this man had another thought in his mind. Without wasting time, he steps forward to the young mage and addresses the black-armored knight from the enemy faction. The good leader asks his counterpart if he still considered the possibility that both he and all the traders traveling in his caravan would surrender their valuable belongings and, in that way, be allowed to leave alive. The knight is surprised by the proposal from the elder, as it seemed that everything was pointing towards a fight. So, he gives his approval to Lu Sai Meng and congratulates him for being a smart person, comparing him to the young man whom he considered foolish for wanting to face him. Then he tells him to leave the merchandise and go wherever he pleases, assuring him that his life is spared. Y becomes upset by the caravan leader's decision and also for making it without consulting him, who was in charge of protecting him. The leader asks for understanding, explaining that by giving up all their valuable goods, they could escape and thus save the lives of the entire caravan without fighting, only losing material. Y turns calmly and tells him that since they haven't trusted him, from this moment on, he will stop defending them, and the fierce dragon team won't help them either. Now Y turns to his rival and without saying any more words, he begins to generate a shield of light around his body, indicating that the fight will start soon. His opponent congratulates him for his bravery and threatens him by saying that the fight will be simple and short. Our protagonist invites him to make the first move and provokes him by saying he wants to feel the power of the knight. Immediately, his rival charges towards him, drawing one of his swords and causing a slash in the air that transforms into a powerful shockwave. Y counters the move with his shield of light, which he has also transformed into a kind of wave resembling the appearance of his rival's attack. Both magical forces collide, showcasing the power of their wielders. After this clash of powers, both are propelled in opposite directions. The force of their abilities is strong enough to push them away from each other. He is curious because the protagonist managed to conjure a defensive spell without even mentioning his spirits of light. This leads him to question whether he's truly a mage or a warrior. Y responds that due to his high level of power, he no longer needs to recite spells to summon the spirits of light. The enemy seems to care very little or almost nothing about our protagonist's words and attacks him, thinking that if he attacks head-on, he shouldn't fail. However, Y manages to evade the offensive move of his rival, although with great difficulty. The protagonist now thinks that the opponent is very fast and he should end the fight soon as it could bring complications. Now Y takes a firm stance on solid ground and extends his hand with his fingers spread out as if it were a sword. Then, he summons his spirits of light and transforms his hand into a bright level 6 lightsaber, powerful and sharp, to destroy his rival. It was now known as the renewed cutting light sword. His rival laughs and mocks, saying that it seems he prefers close combat, unaware that he's mocking an extremely powerful attack. Y tells him to be quiet and says he'll let him experience something new and fun. He swings his arm as if it were a real sword, creating a shockwave that suggests with a well-placed attack he could defeat his rival. The knight, very surprised, lets out a cry of astonishment as he feels that sword hitting his left shoulder and damaging his armor. Y now stops his attacks and reminds him that a knight's duel is one conducted with respect and values, and one of these values is that if your opponent cannot counterattack, the fight should not continue. That was the case at that moment. The knight had been injured by the young man and didn't feel capable of launching a counterattack. But he wouldn't leave it at that, he still had more in store. The knight congratulates Y for his level of power at such a young age and tells him that he's truly starting to admire him. Also, the fact that he stayed to fight against his entire faction in the name of the caravan travelers was truly incredible. But far from forgiving Y, the enemy decides to give him the opportunity to show his true power. So, he now summons his battle tiger to continue the encounter. Once the summoning process is complete, a giant beast appears behind the knight. It was a white tiger with black stripes, similar to a Bengal tiger, and it looked intimidating as it fixed its gaze on Y, eager to savor the young mage's flesh. The knight introduces it as his soul beast, named the Battle Tiger. He then tells the young man that, to level the playing field, he would give him the opportunity to summon his own soul beast as well. Y didn't do anything in response to the knight's invitation. He simply waited. The knight now states that he wanted to continue the battle with him, as it was nothing like the ones he had experienced before. In fact, he had a feeling it would be the most enjoyable battle he had in a long time. So, in order to multiply his power, he performs a fusion ability. A tiger lunges forward, and Y believes he's about to be overwhelmed by it, but he's mistaken. The creature impacts its master and then disappears completely from the scene. After a brief flash, the knight reappears with a different armor. This one is white and radiant, with golden details fit for a royal knight. His sword is thicker and larger, black in color, appearing even deadlier than before. Once the knight notices that his opponent is utterly surprised by the appearance of his new armor, he invites him to another duel. Y ponders for a moment. He knows very well that if he doesn't summon his soul beast, Zyojin, he will definitely lose the battle. But he's afraid to do so. He still holds that fear of losing and of his beast dying, as had happened the last time. He can't afford to take that risk again, but he also can't afford to lose his life, the mercenary mission entrusted to him, or to fail his master Leolon. So, he makes the final decision to summon his soul beast, his companion Zyojin. Y shouts to the air with a lot of hope, "Zyojin, I believe in you." And from his chest, a light illuminates the ground. After the characteristic blindness caused by all light-related abilities, the knight looks at the protagonist and is impressed by what he sees. A mythological beast stands behind the young man, a pinkish dragon with a serpentine appearance. This creature is notably larger than the knight's tiger, more joyful, and possibly more powerful as well. The small and tender snake that had emerged from a simple egg so long ago is long gone. The protagonist tells his companion that he has no intention of making it fight, that it can go play elsewhere if it wants. However, the beast refuses. It understands the true reason it has been summoned and has no problem engaging in battle. It has complete trust in both of them. So, the protagonist nods and knows it's time to fight. Both of them turn towards the rival and assume battle positions. Zyojin roars so loudly that it shakes the ground and stuns those present in the forest. The allies of the Tiger Knight, seeing how dangerous the giant dragon appeared, give up fighting and even staying to witness their leader's battle. Right after, they retreat in defeat. To Y's surprise, and bringing him almost to tears, the main enemy knight has a similar reaction. He opens his eyes in horror, perhaps wondering to himself what kind of magical beast this is. Then he exclaims that he even feels his tiger wants to break free from the body fusion and no longer wishes to fight against Y and his giant serpent dragon. Consequently, he opts for surrender. Y is relieved to hear that, though he didn't expect it at all. He calls his beast back into him, and Zyojin huffs disappointedly as it can't fight and showcase its power. The knight is so frightened that he pleads with Y to please call back his beast out of fear, that it might disobey and attack him nonetheless. Y finally complies with the request. When Zyojin finishes retreating within Y's body, the young man is utterly exhausted, panting heavily, and showing signs of fatigue. He explains that his beast consumes too much magical energy, almost half of his reserves, leaving him unfit for further combat. But his words are interrupted by the Dark Knights, who, surprisingly addressing him as younger brother, attempts to convince himself that the fight isn't over. He just doesn't want to pit his tiger's power against Y's dragon on even terms, as it wouldn't be interesting to prove anything. After this, he tells Y they could be friends, to which Y responds that he never imagined being friends with a bandit. On the other hand, Y's allies congratulate him for achieving victory in the battle, even though there was no need to fight. Lu Meng appears, regretful, and asks Longmeng if he could kindly speak with the young Grand Mage to request his help in persuading the bandits to let them go once and for all. Otherwise, their loss would be considerable when it comes to the objects. Longmeng tells him that he's embarrassed by him, as moments ago he had given up his belongings to escape unharmed. Then it's Lu Meng himself who must personally plead with young Y to ask the knights if they would let them go. Y tells him that enough with the begging, and finally agrees, as he has a kind heart and bears no grudges. Once our protagonist delivers the message to the Dark Knights, they tell him it will be impossible to return the items they had acquired through their own efforts, although we all know those efforts involve delinquency. The leader of the Knights explains to Y why he continues to value those people who ultimately had abandoned him before and didn't trust him. Y explains that they are his clients, so he must protect and assist them to receive payment and elevate his mercenary level. The Black Knight disagrees with Y, so the latter pleads with him to return the items and promises to owe him a favor in the future. The knight remains indifferent but eventually agrees to Y's request, telling him that he loves his personality. Therefore, this time he will return the stolen goods, but only half of them. Y reluctantly understands that the knight also has brothers who need to bring money home to their families, and they've been accompanying him on this journey for over a month. Going back home empty-handed would be disappointing. Y tries to say something about this, but the knight cuts him off, as he hasn't finished saying what he needs to say. Now he tells Y that he'll set a condition that the young man must respect and fulfill. He wants Y to visit him at his fortress the next day. Y accepts and bids farewell to Lu Simeng and Longmeng's caravan to go with the bandits to where their home is located. This way, he can prevent the deal from falling through and the leader knight from backing out. So, without further ado, the protagonist joins the group of criminals and heads to their fortress with them. He notifies Longmeng beforehand that they should proceed directly to Ziyuda, and he will meet them there. Once their journey is underway, Y recalls that he had never introduced himself to the bandit group, so he does so with his name, last name, and even mentions that he's almost 17 years old. The leader of the malefactors smiles at the young man and tells him that everyone calls him Janhu. He's currently 28 years old, but he'll turn 29 later in the current year. Y smiles back and tells him that he would make a good older brother, but what he's interested in right now is seeing Janhu's home. Janhu agrees and invites him to pass through an archway made of bricks, through which a dense ray of sunlight filters. Y crosses the boundary between light and darkness, finally entering the bandit's fortress. As he shows up, two women energetically greet Janhu from the windows of a nearby building, alerting others to his arrival with their greeting. Then two elderly women, feeling proud, express their joy at seeing him return. Two young children also run towards him, eager to embrace him and thank him for coming back alive. Janhu invites everyone to gather around the cart he just brought and help themselves to the goods inside. As people approach the area, the knight asks the protagonist to follow him. Finally, where they are headed is Janhu's home. He advises Y that he doesn't need to take off his shoes and can come in. Y enters, but what he sees inside Janhu's home leaves him bewildered. Janhu had removed his helmet, revealing his long black hair that reached down to his waist, a sight that nobody had had the chance to see until that moment. Y doesn't have time to comment on his striking hair, as the host of the home was approaching him with a bottle. Jan tells him to come over to the table, as it's a good time for them to share a meal and chat a little. Y doesn't want to intrude, but he also can't help making a constructive comment about the home to his hosts. He tells Jan that he should reinforce it a bit, as a strong windstorm could cause disasters to his house. However, Jan tells him that improving the structure would be a luxury for him, and that's not something he's interested in. His life is simple and humble, and he doesn't need more than that. Our protagonist partly understands what the knight is saying, but he can't keep his mouth shut and asks if Jan had gone through sad moments in his life that led him to have that personality today. Jan confesses that what the young man thinks is true. He has had a tough life. Then, to the magician's surprise, the knight says he will tell him everything right at that moment while they drink together. Y doesn't seem to have any issue with listening to the stories that his new friend has to tell. But what he wants to decline is the wine, as he had never tried an alcoholic drink before. Jan tells him to relax and that it's a good time for him to do so, as the wine he's offering is delicious. Y agrees and says that this time he'll join him, and once his host pours the wine into Y's container, the latter proposes a toast. After clinking their glasses, Y takes his first sip of this alcoholic beverage and immediately makes a disgusted face, indicating that he finds the taste horrible. The character's dialogue begins with a basic question from the young man, who asks the knight why he chose the path of the bandits with all the dangers it entailed. Y was convinced that with the skills displayed by the nearly 30-year-old knight, he could have been hired almost anywhere he set his mind to. Now it's Jan's turn to speak, and he gladly tells Y that many years ago, when he was around the same age as the protagonist, he was considered a true genius in the city of Ziyuda. At just 20 years old, he had become a Knight of the Sky rank. The most important thing about achieving this rank was that his entire family was eager for him to reach that goal. Y nods, but there was still something he didn't quite understand, how Jan had veered onto the path of the bandits. Jan then went on to explain that he quickly enlisted in the army and even more rapidly climbed through the ranks, giving him access to join the regiment of the Kingdom of Ziyuda, also known as the Earth Dragon Battalion. Y is as interested as he is surprised after hearing this last part, But that wasn't all. Jan, who also tells him that he had been the captain of one of the top 3 Earth Dragon battalions. Y remarks that he must have been very proud of that back in those times. Then he asks a question that he had been wondering about for a long time, whether it's true that when a person becomes the captain of an Earth Dragon battalion, a dragon follows them for life. Jan's expression darkens, and he proceeds to tell Y that what he's saying is true. Then he launches into a new story. The knight tells the protagonist that in those times, he had been the owner of one of the Earth Dragons and had battled alongside it. They had an excellent relationship, but sadly, one afternoon everything changed. It turns out that his dragon, named Maizio, had to be sacrificed after Jan failed in one of their training sessions, and his dragon saved his life, but suffered irreversible damage. Y is taken aback upon hearing his host's story and tries to lessen the pain that recounting that part of his life brings. He tells Jan that he shouldn't blame himself, as it wasn't his fault for what had happened. Although Y knows very well that his words won't change anything or might not even matter to the knight. Nevertheless, he doesn't give up and adds that his dragon, Maizio, wouldn't want to see him sad today. Therefore, he should strengthen himself so that his dragon can be proud of him. Finally, the knight gives in and responds weakly, "I suppose so." Then the conversation between the characters continues without any issues. This led the young magician to believe that his words had an effect, as Jan seemed much calmer than before. This is despite the fact that the knight continued discussing the topic of his deceased dragon. He told Y that even today, he still felt guilty, and most of the people he confessed to accused him of being a merciless murderer. Jan continues with his story from his younger days and shares with the protagonist that after the accident with his dragon, he was removed from the captain's position. Everyone in the battalion looked at him and criticized him when they found out what had happened. He couldn't bear it any longer and decided to resign from the battalion. Later on, he wandered aimlessly until he came across a somewhat special village. Everyone in the village were active thieves, since he hadn't been accepted anywhere until then, and the thieves' village had welcomed him. He made the decision to stay there. Eventually, he became the leader of all the malefactors in the village, forming a solid band of thieves. After so many stories and realizing that their relationship was good, or at least that's what it seemed for the moment, they both agree to recognize each other as brothers in the eyes of God. Maybe it's the wine they had consumed, or perhaps they truly saw each other as brothers, but the fact is that they reached an agreement and acknowledged it. They had a final toast and both went to sleep in the early hours of the morning. Y wakes up after a deep sleep, and the first thing he does is hold his head. He felt an explosive headache. Jan suddenly appears with a tray and breakfast served on it, happy to see his younger brother awake. Y asks his older brother why he's experiencing such an exaggerated headache, and he's told that it's due to the number of glasses he drank the previous night. Y doesn't argue since he's not knowledgeable about the subject, but he does ask Jan why it's not happening to him. Jan responds that he does it every day, so his body is used to it and reacts that way. Jan leaves breakfast on the table for Y to have whenever he wants, then turns to the protagonist and asks if what they talked about the previous night regarding being brothers of God still stands or not. The magician responds that he would love for it to be so. After this, he gets up from the bed, stands in front of Jan, and with a smile on his face, extends his hand to shake hands with the host of the house, thus sealing the pact of being brothers. Both of them are happy to have forged this bond and are eager to start a life together as brothers from that moment on, defying all kinds of adventures that destiny may present to them. And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word light in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.